Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into velvet-draped shadows and long-forgotten cellars, peeling back the royal curtain on what really happened when the crown came off and the cork popped. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this, not because of swords or betrayal or poisoned goblets, but because kings through history partied harder than any rock star ever could. Like, try not to lose your head, literally. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it in your corner of the world? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in ancient Sumer, around 3000 BCE. The air is thick with the scent of roasted goat incense, and human sweat because deodorant hasn't been invented and everyone's been dancing for hours. The music, bronze cymbals, lyres, and a rhythmic drum that echoes off clay walls. You're seated in a royal feast hall, your back sticking to a carved wooden bench, a goblet of lukewarm beer in your hand. Yeah, beer. Not some microbrew IPA, but a sludgy fermented barley brew so thick you drink it through a straw made of reeds. This is what kings guzzle here. Wine's still a luxury, but beer? That's divine. The king of Uruk raises his chalice, dripping gold and garnished with lapis lazuli, and bellows something about honouring the gods and bringing prosperity to the land. Everyone cheers. But it's not just about drinking, it's religion. Royalty doesn't get drunk for fun, well, not only. They get drunk to channel the gods, to show the people their divine connection. In this world, a tipsy king is a spiritual conduit, or so they say. The truth? This royal party is half ritual, half chaos. Some priests chant sacred hymns in a back corner, while others are passed out in puddles of mead. You watch as the king, belly full of roasted lamb and fermented grain, laughs Tudor. He falls off his throne. No one stops him, because he's the chosen one, and because no one wants to be executed before dessert. Across the ancient world, the same pattern repeats. Slip into Egypt's golden halls and it's not much different. Pharaohs hold elaborate festivals called feasts of drunkenness, in honour of the goddess Hathor. The myth goes that Hathor once tried to destroy humanity, but Ra tricked her by pouring beer dyed red to look like blood. She drank it, passed out, and humanity survived. So naturally, every year, everyone gets completely blitzed to celebrate, including the pharaoh. Especially the pharaoh. You're sitting by a lotus pond near the Temple of Dendera now, your linen tunic barely protecting you from the desert chill. Musicians strum harps and sing hymns to Hathor, while dancers swirl around torchlight. Jars of beer flow freely, and you're encouraged, no, expected, to drink until your limbs stop working. The pharaoh, dressed in ceremonial gold, sips from a jug, trying to maintain composure as priests chant nonsense and women howl like jackals to honour the goddess. By midnight, half the nobility is horizontal. A little-known quirk? Some Egyptian hieroglyphs hint at special hangover potions, reserved only for the elite. Aloe pulp, fig juice, and myrrh, basically the worst smoothie ever, but apparently enough to drag a pharaoh back to consciousness in time for the morning sun ritual. Whether these worked or just made things worse is still debated by scholars who have never, to our knowledge, actually tested the recipe. There's a scholarly debate about just how spiritual all of this was. Were these royal parties truly sacred acts, or did the ritual side conveniently mask good old-fashioned indulgence? Some archaeologists argue that the religious spin came after the tradition, as a kind of holy PR. Others think the two were always intertwined, divine connection through intoxication. Either way, the result was the same. Very powerful men and women getting absolutely obliterated in full view of their subjects. And it wasn't without consequences. Some clay tablets suggest that royal drinking nights led to disastrous policy decisions. One Sumerian king apparently ordered a city wall torn down because he didn't like how it looked when drunk. Another Egyptian court document complains of a drunken vizier vomiting on sacred scrolls. The king excused it. He was channeling Hathor, he said. But not all was comedy. There were darker edges too. Alcohol, especially in the hands of the powerful, has a way of unmasking paranoia, cruelty, and suppressed ambition. One evening in Thebes, it's whispered, a pharaoh strangled a priest during a feast, suspecting him of treason, only to regret it by sunrise and have the body mummified in secret. The story's never been proven, but then again, so much wasn't written down. The most interesting parts never are. And while royal hangovers in the ancient world rarely made the history books, they did make marks on walls. One Babylonian mural shows a king passed out while a servant fans him, wine goblet still in hand. Some see it as satire, others a warning. Even the mighty fall, especially when they're drunk off their gold-plated butts. You lean back into your seat, gazing around this ancient hall, realizing something unsettling. These early kings weren't just figureheads. They were living gods, or believed they were. So when they drank, it wasn't just about the buzz. It was about power, about spectacle, about reminding everyone that even when vomiting into a marble bowl, they were still untouchable. You'd think we'd grow out of that. But oh no, my friend, this is only the first course. By the time we get to medieval Europe, the drinks get stronger, the egos get bigger, and the blood, well, you'll see. For now though, as the Sumerian harp slows its rhythm and the Egyptian sun creeps toward morning, you find yourself blinking into the firelight, wondering if royal blood comes with a higher alcohol tolerance, or just better excuses. Now the flickering torchlight fades and reforms itself into the soft amber glow of oil lamps. The air shifts, less dry desert, more salty sea breeze mixed with burnt olive wood. You're in ancient Greece now, lounging awkwardly on a cushion that's way too flat, your back angled against a marble bench carved with vines and mythological beasts. You're at a symposium, which basically means drink together. And no, you're not getting out of here sober. The host of this particular night is an Athenian aristocrat with teeth too white to trust. He lifts a shallow, wide clay cup called a kylix and leads a toast to Athena, to victory in war, to poetry, and also to whoever brought the figs. Everyone laughs. You smile. You don't fully understand the joke, but you laugh anyway. This is elite company. Philosophers, poets, warriors, and a guy whose entire job appears to be pouring wine and telling dirty jokes. Here's the twist. They don't drink wine straight. That would be barbaric. Wine is mixed with water in a huge bronze bowl called a crater. The stronger the wine-to-water ratio, the wilder the night gets. And tonight's mixture? Let's just say moderation isn't trending. Now you'd think an evening with Socrates and his friends would be all civil debates and polite clinking of cups. Nope. The conversations start classy. What is justice? Is love divine? But as the night rolls on, clothes loosen, logic melts, and the philosophical banter dissolves into rants, sobbing, confessions, and someone in the corner singing to a fig tree. This wasn't a side effect. This was the point. Greek symposia were designed to dance that dangerous edge between order and chaos. You drink, you debate, you strip away the polite masks of society and bare your raw, drunken soul to the gods and your equally sloshed peers. This is where policy decisions start, where reputations are forged or shattered, where a single poorly worded insult muttered through a wine haze can spark feuds that outlive empires. You sip your wine, it's bitter, slightly smoky, and so diluted you wonder if you're being scammed. But then the servant adds a splash of resin or honey, and suddenly it's drinkable, just in time for the next round. A game begins, kotobos, a messy, ridiculous sport where players fling wine dregs across the room trying to hit a target like drunken darts. You try it, you miss. Badly. A philosopher nearby claps anyway and calls it a metaphor for desire. Amid the madness, there's structure. The night is overseen by a symposiarch or master of the party, basically the ancient Greek version of a frat pledge who takes his job way too seriously. His role, dictate how strong the wine is, when music plays, when games begin, and when someone needs to be escorted home for accidentally calling a senator's wife a very spirited donkey. One historical fact worth noting, Socrates, legend says, was immune to hangovers. During banquets like these, while others slurred and stumbled, he could drink cup after cup and remain eerily lucid. Some say it was divine favour. Others suspect he was just sneakily dumping his wine when no one was looking. Either way, being the only sober philosopher in a room full of drunk thinkers probably felt like babysitting chaos with a degree in logic. Now, here's where things get fringe. Some accounts suggest that certain symposia included more than just wine and words. There's evidence, scratched pottery, obscure writings, that hallucinogenic plants may have been added to drinks at high-level feasts. Not often, and definitely not for amateurs. Only the elite, the spiritually daring, would enter these altered states. They called it accessing divine madness. You call it ancient Greek shrooms in a wine spritzer. But there's debate here. Scholars can't agree on whether these drug drinks were common or if later writers exaggerated for flair. Some think only specific cults, like the followers of Dionysus, god of wine and chaos, experimented with spiked chalices. Others argue that nearly every royal court had their secret stash. What's certain is that after a few hours in one of these gatherings, you start to see why the gods were always drunk, dramatic, and wildly dysfunctional. And speaking of dysfunction, let's talk about power. These weren't just drinking nights for fun, they were networking events. Aristocrats brought their sons to learn the ropes. Ambassadors came to gossip. Poets performed with the desperation of modern open mic comics. And behind the laughter there was constant manoeuvring, alliances forming over shared goblets, rivalries heating with each toast. One infamous night involved Alcibiades, the charming, reckless Athenian general. He bursts into a symposium late, already half naked and completely drunk, throws a fit over unrequited love for Socrates, and ends up weeping into a cushion. He also spills a state secret, just a little one, about an upcoming naval manoeuvre. Oops. The next day rumours are to explode across Athens, and Alcibiades has to leave town. Again. Moral of the story: never overshare during a toast, especially when a playwright is in the room. You recline back, tipsy now as the lamps flicker lower, and the scent of incense mixes with the sweat of philosophers arguing about whether truth exists. Someone passes you a honey cake, someone else starts vomiting into a potted plant, and you realise this is what Greek royalty and elites believed separated them from the barbarians. Not the wine, but the ritual of it. The philosophy, the pageantry, the carefully choreographed descent into dignified debauchery. And yet, when you squint at the scene, it doesn't look that different from a college party with better pottery and more existential dread. The wine still flows, the gossip still burns, and somewhere in the back, two grown men are wrestling over a misunderstanding involving figs and fate. As dawn breaks, you follow the others out into the marble courtyard. The cool breeze hits your face amidst chirp. Somewhere a lyre player is passed out beside a statue of Apollo. Your head's spinning, but your mind's clear, at least for a moment. You've seen what happens when power, alcohol, and unchecked ego mix under the soft light of oil lamps. And you also know this is just Act 2. The Romans are coming next, and they don't believe in moderation. They believe in decadence, in vomiting rooms, and in drinking wine by the gallon. Better grab a toga, you're going to need it. The marble fades beneath your feet, traded for colder stone and the hum of something louder, grander. You open your eyes and suddenly you're in Rome. Not modern Rome, with its espresso bars and tired tourists. No, you're deep in the belly of the Roman Republic, about to slide headfirst into the orgiastic banquet culture of the empire at its wildest. The air is thick with roasted garlic, perfume and tension. There's gold everywhere, on goblets, plates, even the eyebrows of a nearby senator's wife. You're reclining, not sitting, mind you. Reclining on a luxurious couch called a lectus in a triclinium, a Roman dining room where everything from politics to assassinations are quietly negotiated over stuffed dormice and honeyed wine. You're not just at dinner, you're in the Colosseum of elite indulgence. A servant approaches with a jug of Falernian wine, the good stuff aged for decades, possibly older than you. It's thick, syrupy, spiked with resin and herbs, and strong enough to light on fire. You take a sip, your throat burns, your nose tingles, and your stomach sends a quick, "Are you sure about this?" a message to your brain. But too late, you've swallowed. Congratulations, you're officially part of Rome's upper crust, or at least their late-night mistakes. Seated across from you is a senator already halfway to blacked out, laughing at nothing and attempting to feed grapes to a marble bust of Jupiter. It's a strange kind of formal chaos. Musicians play softly in the corner, nude dancers swirl in rhythm, and the host, wearing a toga that costs more than most people's houses, raises his goblet to toast the emperor. Not because he admires him, because it's safer that way. This is where it gets interesting. Drinking in Rome isn't just entertainment, it's a test of status and stamina. The more you drink, the more refined you're supposed to appear. And no, vomiting is not a disqualification. It's practically encouraged. They even build vomitoria into the banquet halls, which, contrary to myth, are not rooms specifically for puking, but exits from stadiums. Still, aristocrats make liberal use of side rooms and golden buckets to purge mid-meal and make room for more wine and eel pie. Tonight's entertainment includes poetry, gladiatorial show and tells, and an awkward performance by a flute player who clearly didn't expect to be upstaged by a parrot trained to mimic Cicero's speeches. The room is vibrating with power and drunken tension. One wrong look, one mistimed joke, and you could be exiled. Or worse, Now, let's talk about the emperors. Oh boy, you've heard of Caligula, right? That cheerful lad who allegedly made his horse a senator and maybe slept with his sisters. His parties were the Super Bowl of excess. Picture a floating palace with fountains pouring wine, floors tiled in gemstones, and orgies lasting days, interrupted only for ritual sacrifice or group bathing. According to legend, Caligula once hosted a banquet so wild, 3 senators died before dessert. Stroke, poison, boredom, no one's really sure. One verified historical fact. Emperor Elagabalus, teenage ruler and chaos magnet, liked to drown guests in rose petals. Sounds cute until you realise it wasn't metaphorical. He once ordered the ceiling of his banquet hall to collapse an avalanche of flowers onto his guests. So many, some allegedly suffocated. Not exactly a TikTokable moment. The fringe rumour? Nero, yep, the guy who fiddled while Rome burned, may have hosted moonlight feasts where guests drank wine laced with powdered gold. Why? Because drinking liquid wealth was the ultimate flex. Scholars debate this, of course. Some say it's literary exaggeration. Others point to weird Roman medical texts that mention ingesting metals for eternal youth. Spoiler, it doesn't work. Nero still died. And not of gold poisoning. Another scholarly debate worth sipping on. Was this all as depraved as later historians made it sound? Many of the juiciest Roman drinking stories come from writers who despised the emperors they described. Tacitus, Suetonius, they loved a good smear campaign. Some historians think Roman banquets were more performative than perverse, like an ancient soap opera. Others argue the upper class really did lose the plot. Given how many statues of Bacchus they owned, and how many wine cellars doubled as execution chambers, you're inclined to believe the worst. As the night wears on, the line between guest and hostage blurs. The wine keeps flowing. A Roman general, shirt halfway off, recites Homer with a wine-stained scroll. Someone bets their villa in a dice game and wins a goat instead. You're offered a dessert of honey-soaked locusts. You decline politely, because you're too distracted by the senator next to you threatening to stab a slave for pouring with the wrong hand. You start to notice how drinking here isn't just about fun, it's about control. The emperor drinks last, always. He watches everyone else, who's getting too bold, who's trying too hard to please, who's gossiping when they think no one's listening. The wine loosens lips, sure, but it also reveals loyalties. In Rome, the drink is a mirror, and the mirror often cracks. And the worst part, you can't leave until the host says so. Etiquette demands endurance. Leaving early implies insult. So you sit there, buzzing from the wine, legs numb from reclining, listening to a failed actor try to seduce a matron with a monologue from Plautus. No one laughs, but no one tells him to stop either. By dawn, the floor is sticky, the candles are low, and a servant is sweeping up crushed oysters and broken dreams. You stumble out into the atrium, unsure whether you've just attended a historical banquet or survived an ancient fever dream. The hangover is already curling in your temples, a souvenir of too much fermented power and privilege. And yet somehow you know this is still just the pre-game. Rome's wildest drinking nights were extravagant, sure, but the Norse kings up north, oh, they made wine look like child's play. They drank to summon gods, to declare vengeance and to seal blood oaths. Their drinking halls were colder, louder, and filled with far more axes. Better find something fur-lined. We're heading to Scandinavia next. The marble and silk of Rome fade, replaced by raw timber beams and the smell of smoke, sweat, and something sizzling over an open fire. You're in a Viking longhouse now, and subtlety has been thrown to the wind along with personal hygiene. This isn't a place for poets quoting Euripides. This is where men with names like Bjorn the Flatnose and Gudrun Iron Eyes slam down horns of mead and shout oaths to Odin. Welcome to the mead hall, where royal drinking doesn't just accompany power, it defines it. The air's heavy with heat and danger. Torches flicker along the dark wooden walls, throwing dancing shadows over intricately carved dragon heads. The benches are full, pressed tight with warriors, jarls, and skalds. You're seated beside a chieftain whose beard could smother a small horse, and across from a woman who might be a queen, or just the only person here still sober enough to walk straight. Someone behind you belches loud enough to shake the rafters. No one bats an eye. A servant lugs a wooden cask into the centre of the hall and opens the spout. Out pours mead, fermented honey wine, thick and golden, buzzing with herbs. It's strong enough to drop an ox if you're not careful. You raise your drinking horn, a polished piece of some unfortunate beast, and it's filled without question. In the Viking world, everyone drinks, rich, poor, man, woman. But when you're royalty, your tolerance is part of your legend. The king, Harold something grand-sounding, sits at the highest seat, wearing a bear cloak and a crown that looks more like a weapon than a symbol. He raises his horn and makes the first toast. Not to peace, not to prosperity, to battle, to Valhalla, to the blood of enemies spilled like wine. Cheers. The hall erupts. This is no dinner party, it's a ritual. Every toast follows strict rules, part of the sumbel, a ceremonial round of drinking, boasting and oath-swearing. When it's your turn, you stand, declare your lineage, your deeds, your dreams, and then drink deep. And if you slur, if your knees wobble, if your words falter, you're shamed, ridiculed, maybe challenged to a duel before dessert. One historical nugget worth savouring. The Norse took their drinking vessels seriously. Royal families often drank from horns decorated with silver, amber and dragon motifs. Some even used skulls. Yep, actual enemy skulls, polished and sealed, turned into toasting cups. A bit much, maybe, but imagine the power flex of sipping mead from the head of the guy who tried to invade your fjord. The fringe fact: some sagas hint that Viking kings mixed certain psychoactive mushrooms into their mead for special occasions. Fly agaric, those red and white spotted mushrooms that scream bad idea, were rumoured to be part of berserker rituals. Not widely accepted, but some scholars have linked the hallucinations and battle rages described in text to possible intoxication beyond alcohol. Whether real or legend, it adds an unsettling twist to your drink. There's debate about the sumbel's origins. Was it purely Norse, or did it grow from older Germanic tribal traditions? Some archaeologists argue that the formality of Viking drinking was influenced by earlier Roman feasting structures, filtered north and made more axe-friendly. Others think the Norse developed it independently, a unique blend of spirituality, social hierarchy, and alcohol-induced testosterone. As the night deepens, the stories get louder. Boasts turn to confessions, confessions to challenges. A warrior stands to toast his brother, dead in battle, and swears to avenge him against the neighbouring tribe. Another stands, clearly drunk, and claims he once bedded the Queen of Denmark. Silence. A few chuckles. The king stares. A duel is likely by morning. Someone throws an axe, not at a person, thankfully, but at a wooden post with a painted target. This is Drucken Leica, or Drunken Games, and it's half fun, half proof of worth. You join in, staggering a little, barely missing the mark and earning a rough pat on the back and a rib-crushing hug from a woman named Solveig, who might have just claimed you as her third husband. It's hard to tell. Here's the thing about Viking royal drinking. It wasn't just socializing. It was law, legend, and religion all tangled in honeyed chaos. Feasts were timed with seasonal festivals, especially Yule, the midwinter Yule celebration that lasted for days. Drinking wasn't optional. It was an offering to the gods, to the ancestors, to the fates. If you didn't drink or drank too little, that was seen as disrespectful, unmanly, possibly unholy. And don't think women were excluded. Viking noblewomen drank alongside men and sometimes led their own toasts. Some even acted as weavers of fate, interpreting the drunken oaths of warriors and determining whether they'd be fulfilled. You lock eyes with one across the room, her face painted with runes, her expression unreadable. She raises her cup to you. You raise yours back, unsure if you've just agreed to something sacred or stupid. Then the skalds begin. These are the poets, the keepers of memory. Their job? To immortalize the night in verse, who drank what, who swore what, who fell face first into the fire pit and had to be dragged out by the beard. They perform, rhyming tales of past kings and future glory, weaving tonight's calm chaos into tomorrow's history. Because in this world, what's said while drinking often becomes legend. Hours blur, your head swims, you've eaten something that might have been seal, someone tried to arm wrestle you with their feet. And now a bearded man is teaching you how to make a blood oath using a slice to the palm and a mutual chug from the same horn. You pretend you left your knife at home. As dawn edges over the snow-covered hills, the hall grows quiet. Bodies slouch against walls. Snores echo. The king leans back, eyes glassy, mumbling something about Thor's thighs and national unity. You wrap yourself in a bear pelt, unsure if you're part of a royal feast or an ancient fever dream. But you do understand one thing clearly. Drinking here isn't escape, it's identity. It's the binding agent of loyalty, legend, and leadership. To be a king in the Norse world was to drink with strength, to toast with purpose, and to survive the night, both in body and in memory. And as you close your eyes, warm from fire and mead, you realise the pattern is forming. Wherever the crown sits, the cup follows. From golden goblets to dragonhorn chalices, power always makes room for indulgence. Next stop, Byzantium, where emperors drink by candlelight in halls dripping with silken secrets, and one wrong toast can unmake an empire. The warmth of the Viking fire fades, and the scent of smoke and sweat is replaced by incense, heavy, spicy, almost cloying. You blink and the world reshapes into something softer, richer, but no less dangerous. You're in Byzantium now, what the West later calls the Eastern Roman Empire. The city of Constantinople glows outside the palace windows, domes glittering in the moonlight, marble mosaics shimmering with candlelight. Everything here gleams except the people. You're standing in the great palace, or rather, you're being ushered into one of its private chambers. Not the throne room, no. This is where real decisions are made. The walls are silk, the floors are onyx, and the wine flows like water through veins of gold. You're about to witness the Byzantine royal drinking culture, a world of court politics soaked in grape and honey and occasionally poisoned for effect. The emperor tonight is not some brute in a horned helmet. He's draped in jewelled robes, his fingers heavy with rings, his face unreadable. He sits at the centre of a semicircle of nobles, courtiers, bishops, and guests, each one sipping carefully, smiling politely, lying through their teeth. Welcome to the most elegant game of survival drinking history has ever known. The wine is strong, perfumed, and served in thin crystal goblets. It's red, nearly black, and flavoured with cinnamon, cloves, and just a hint of don't ask. You take a cautious sip and it's sweeter than you expect, almost syrupy. That's the thing about Byzantium. Nothing is what it seems, even the wine. There's no roaring or axe throwing here. Everything is slow, controlled. A toast is made to the Virgin Mary, another to the emperor's newly announced heir, who may or may not survive the week. You nod along, holding your goblet with both hands, because you're starting to notice how many people here aren't drinking much. They raise their glasses. They smile. They sip so little it barely counts. You, however, are halfway through your second and beginning to feel like a cautionary tale. One fact that shines through the layers of incense and intrigue: the Byzantines were excellent winemakers. Their vineyards stretched across the empire, from Thrace to Anatolia to Crete, and they took their vintages seriously. Some varieties were aged for decades in amphorae lined with resin. The imperial cellars were legendary. Some documents suggest the court had wine older than the reigning emperor. A few even whispered that the emperors drank wine made from grapes blessed during Constantine's own time, probably a myth. But you know how legends work around here? They age better than the wine. Now, the quirk? The court eunuchs, often wielding tremendous influence behind the scenes, were known to host private feasts with their own elaborate toasting traditions. While technically lesser in social rank, many of them had their own wine rituals, distinct from the emperor's, sometimes mocking them subtly. Some records mention painted goblets with caricatures of current rulers, hidden unless you drained the entire drink. Dangerous humour, but this was a world built on veiled threats and polished daggers. As for scholarly debate, historians are divided on just how scandalous the Byzantine court truly was. Medieval Western writers accuse the Byzantines of decadence, drunken orgies, and hypocrisy, a holy empire built on very unholy appetites. But modern scholars push back. They say these were exaggerations, smear campaigns meant to make the East seem corrupt, while the West claimed the moral high ground. Still, there's no denying the empire's fondness for mixing sacred ceremony with very worldly indulgence. Back in the chamber, things start to tilt, literally. You realise the floor is slightly sloped for easier cleaning, just in case someone spills more than wine. A servant refills your goblet without asking. Another brings a plate of roasted figs and lamb slices so tender they fall apart before reaching your mouth. It's delicious. It's also clearly meant to keep you drinking. To your left, a noble named Alexios whispers a joke about a bishop's mistress. You laugh, too loudly. Heads turn, Alexios smiles like nothing happened. You suddenly feel like a small fish in a pond full of smiling crocodiles. By midnight, the real festivities begin. A lute player plucks haunting melodies in the background, while two veiled dancers perform something that walks the line between sacred ritual and bedroom rehearsal. The emperor watches, face blank, as if bored by the whole affair. But his fingers drum slowly on the table. Someone has said something to irritate him. You don't know what, you just feel the room tighten. And then it happens. A toast from a general, Ambrosio's, old, slightly drunk, full of himself. He lifts his goblet and says something along the lines of, "May the empire never fall to weak men." The room freezes. Weak men? Everyone looks at the emperor. Did he mean the current one, or just the usual bravado? It doesn't matter. The emperor smiles tightly and lifts his goblet in return. Later, Ambrosios will be reassigned to a post in Armenia, conveniently close to the border raids. He won't return. This is how power works here. One sip too many, one word too bold, and you're done. Not beheaded, banished, replaced, forgotten. The Byzantines didn't often kill in the open. They whispered, they repositioned. And they drank with perfect manners while doing it. There's no yelling, no drunken duels, but make no mistake, this is one of the most dangerous drinking rooms in history. You excuse yourself for some air and pass a hallway lined with icons, gold leaf saints watching silently. You wonder how many secrets these walls have absorbed, how many oaths, betrayals, murders planned over a sip of sweet red wine. By dawn, the party thins, the emperor leaves without a word. The room exhales. You're still intact, which is more than can be said for the nervous official who spilled wine on his own lap and was whisked away to rest. And yet, despite the danger, you feel the pull of it, the elegance, the ritual, the theatre. It's intoxicating in more ways than one. Drinking here isn't just indulgence, it's diplomacy, warfare without swords, chess with chalices. But as you step out into the cool morning air and hear the muezzin calling faintly from across the Bosphorus, you know the party's far from over. Now we're heading to a Vatican darker than stained glass, where the Pope wears a crown and a wine-soaked grin, and sin is just part of the schedule. The air shifts again, thickens like incense pressed down with something rotten underneath. You're in Rome, again, but not the imperial marble grandeur of before. No, this time it's the spiritual Rome, the city of saints, martyrs, and a papal court that somehow manages to be holier than thou and drunker than sin at the same time. Welcome to the Vatican of the 10th century, the era of Pope John XII. And if you've come looking for holy water, you're going to be extremely disappointed. This Pope doesn't sip from chalices, he chugs. You're in the Lateran Palace, a place that's supposed to reflect purity, piety, the light of Christ, all that jazz. Instead, it smells like spiced wine, perfumed courtesans, and the lingering shame of yet another religious scandal. Tonight's not about communion. Tonight is a party. And your host, a teenage pope, barely 18, already drunk and somehow holding the keys to heaven. You blink hard, but yep, that's the Pope over there, half naked, standing on a table, challenging a bishop to a drinking contest. You've entered the golden age of papal debauchery, and it's somehow worse and way funnier than you imagined. John XII was born Octavian, a spoiled Roman noble, elevated to the papacy by his powerful family because, why not? He was young, charismatic, and could mumble a Latin prayer without completely messing it up. Unfortunately, he was also wildly unqualified, impulsive, and had the impulse control of a squirrel on fermented fruit. He turned the papal palace into a 24-hour frat house, filled with prostitutes, gambling, and enough wine to float an ark. Tonight's feast is exactly what you'd expect. Courtiers lounging on velvet cushions, cardinals looking the other way, and the Holy Father making obscene jokes in 3 languages. The wine is endless, mostly imported from southern Italy, stored in barrels marked for the church, but secretly diverted for personal reflection. You're handed a goblet by a nun who definitely isn't a nun and definitely just winked at you. You sip. It's surprisingly good, sweet, dark, and potent enough to knock theology clean out of your brain. Now here's the twist. Because he was Pope, John XII's drinking nights weren't just sinful, they were politically explosive, and his enemies in the German Empire used these stories to paint him as the Antichrist. One account claims he toasted to Bacchus, not Christ, and invoked pagan gods during drinking bouts. Others say he offered church treasures as gambling stakes. Whether fully true or exaggerated, it's clear he was less vicar of Christ and more vicar of what happens in Vegas. A quirky detail buried in some sources: John reportedly kept a roster of mistresses, with notes like talks too much or only likes red wine. It sounds absurd until you remember this was a man who turned the Lateran into his personal nightclub. One chronicler, in his most pious panic, claims the Pope was not so much a shepherd of souls as a pimp of bodies. Harsh? Sure. But you look around the candlelit chaos and start to think it might be accurate. There's debate, though. Some modern scholars argue that the worst stories about John XII were part of a hit campaign by political rivals, especially the German Emperor Otto I, who had his own ambitions for church control. Otto eventually invaded Rome, put John on trial in absentia, of course, he was too busy partying, and deposed him for crimes like simony, perjury, and yes, drinking with prostitutes. Still, even sympathetic historians admit, if half the rumours are true, he was doing shots with Satan in the sacristy. You're still seated at the edge of the room trying to stay inconspicuous as two cardinals arm wrestle over a chalice of brandy and someone shouts about excommunicating a donkey. A servant? Possibly a deacon? Hard to tell, stumbles past you holding a platter of roasted peacock and mutters something about the Book of Revelations being too subtle. You nod politely and pretend to read scripture while sneaking another sip. The energy here is strange. It's not just chaos. It's entitlement layered with immortality. This isn't a king drinking for glory or a warlord toasting blood. This is a man with no earthly limits. His title makes him untouchable, invincible, or so he thinks. That's the real drug here, not the wine. It's the illusion that God won't notice what you do after midnight if you're wearing enough velvet. But of course the illusion shatters eventually. John XII didn't die of old age or martyrdom. He died supposedly mid-coitus. Yep. According to one account, he was in bed with another man's wife, again, and either had a stroke or was bludgeoned to death by the angry husband. It depends on who you ask. Either way, not exactly a holy end. You glance around the room one more time, the gold, the silk, the goblets overflowing. You wonder if the man in the papal tiara knows he's already becoming a legend for all the wrong reasons, or if he even cares. The wine flows, the candles flicker, a choir of off-duty monks sings something suspiciously close to a drinking song, and somewhere you think, even the saints are sighing. It's a sobering reminder, ironic you think, that even those meant to represent the divine are just as susceptible to the bottle as anyone else. More, maybe. Because when no one can tell you no, the only limits are how fast your liver gives out. As you leave the Lateran behind, stepping into the cool Roman night, the sound of laughter and sloshing wine fading behind you, you realise the divine right to drink has never really been questioned. It's just been passed around like a chalice. Next stop, Russia, where the vodka's colder, the tempers are shorter, and one royal drinking night might just end with someone getting poisoned, stabbed, or accidentally crowned. You step out of Rome and into a chill that hits your bones before you even open your eyes. Snowflakes swirl sideways in the wind like tiny frozen daggers, and the sky is a bruised grey that feels personal. Welcome to 16th century Russia, the land of long winters, suspicious glances, and vodka as both beverage and blunt instrument. You're standing outside the Tsar's palace in Moscow, Maurice. Bundled in a fur-lined cloak, someone shoved at you without explanation. You pull it tighter, already regretting everything. The palace is less inviting than you'd expect. No golden halls of Versailles here. This place is cold, draughty, and humming with menace. Thick stone walls, narrow windows, and an atmosphere that tastes like fear and fermented rye. You're not here for polite toasts or velvet court games. You're here to drink with Ivan the Terrible, and that's not a nickname he got for being clumsy at charades. The banquet hall is a dim, candlelit vault echoing with drunken laughter, clinking goblets, and the occasional scream. You're escorted, no dragged, to a long wooden table lined with boyars, advisors, guards, and maybe a few corpses still sitting upright. It's hard to tell. The Tsar is already seated at the head of the table, hunched over a gold-plated goblet the size of a helmet, his eyes like icebergs with secrets underneath. Ivan IV is having one of his nights, and by nights we mean full-blown psychological roller coasters soaked in vodka, paranoia, and the kind of mood swings that make weather systems look stable. He greets you with a grin that doesn't reach his eyes and gestures for your goblet to be filled. The vodka is sharp, clear, and immediately sets fire to your lungs. It's not the watered-down, politely distilled stuff. This is brutal, homemade, and potent enough to clean your wounds and your conscience. The drinking begins fast. No rituals, no toasts to the saints, just constant pouring. Ivan drinks like he's trying to drown something that won't stay dead. Between sips, he mutters to his advisors, then turns to shout accusations at ghosts only he can see. 1 minute he's laughing hysterically, the next he's pounding the table so hard the candle flames jump. You nod along, try to blend in, and accept every refill like it's a favour from God. A strange historical fact. Ivan was one of the first Russian rulers to elevate vodka into a political tool. He established state-controlled taverns, kabaks, where peasants could drink, but all profits funneled straight to the state. He taxed drunkenness and used it as surveillance. If a man drank too freely and complained about the Tsar, it got back to Ivan, and back to Ivan. Quickly, the man usually disappeared, or reappeared in pieces, but the royal drinking sessions were worse. These weren't just social events, they were traps. Loyalty was measured in shots, sobriety looked like defiance. And Ivan was always watching. He once executed a noble who declined to drink at a feast, claiming the man was clearly hiding guilt. Another boyar who drank too much and insulted the Tsar ended up impaled, on his own fence. It's a thin line in Russia, especially when the man with the crown is drinking like he's battling demons one swallow at a time. Tonight the vibe is unstole. A boyar to your left just tried to toast the Tsar's deceased wife. Ivan's smile flickers. His hand grips the goblet tighter. For a moment no one breathes. Then Ivan laughs, a dry, bitter laugh, and demands a new toast to Maria. May she haunt us until the grave. The goblets rise, including yours, trembling slightly in your hand. You drink. The vodka is colder than the air outside. Now for the fringe detail. Some sources, fringe chronicles, letters from terrified diplomats, claim Ivan believed his vodka was divinely guided. That in his most paranoid states he thought the right kind of drunk unlocked holy visions. He spoke to saints, saw the devil, was warned of betrayals through the shimmer in his drink. Once it's said he ordered a boyar drowned in vodka for speaking ill of an angel in a dream. Could be apocryphal, could also be Tuesday. Historians debate just how mad Ivan really was. Was he genuinely mentally ill? A product of trauma and inbreeding an endless war? Or was his madness a performance, a weapon, carefully wielded to keep everyone off balance? Some argue he was brilliant, a strategist who used fear the way others use armies. Others think he was completely off his rocker by the end, having murdered his own son in a fit of rage, then weeping over the body with the same hands that had crushed his skull. You sip again, heart hammering as Ivan begins to tell a story. It's not really a story, more like a parable laced with threat. About a serpent in a well, about betrayal by those closest, about fire as a cleansing force. Everyone listens, no one dares interrupt. The room is hot now, full of vodka breath and dread. Someone sneezes. Ivan glares. The sneezer apologizes. Ivan raises his goblet and says, "Bless you, boyar. May the next breath not be your last." You'd laugh if it didn't sound like a real possibility. Time distorts. You've lost count of how many refills you've had. The vodka is like acid now, turning your thoughts to sludge. Ivan calls for music. Not a band, not a choir, just a blind man with a stringed instrument. Playing a tune so mournful you think the wood might start crying. Ivan sways to the rhythm, smiling with his eyes closed. Then he opens them and points at a noble across the room. "You're too quiet," he says. "Tell us a story, or a confession." The noble stutters, invents something bland, meaningless. Ivan listens, sips, nods, and then throws his goblet at the man's head. It misses. Barely. He laughs. Everyone else laughs too a split second later. You force a smile. At last, near dawn, the Tsar declares the night holy. "We have purged evil," he says, gesturing vaguely to the empty air. "We are clean." He stands, wobbling, his robe soaked with spilled liquor, and the weight of something unspeakable. He leaves without another word. The room exhales. You stumble out into the snow. The cold hits you like a punishment. You're alive, mostly. And you understand now why no one in Ivan's court ever truly slept easy. Drinking with royalty is dangerous enough. Drinking with a ruler who sees devils in his cup and murder in every shadow, that's something else. You survived a night with Ivan the Terrible, but don't relax, because now you're heading east again, to the serene palaces of the shoguns, where sake flows with ceremony, and every smile hides a knife. The snow fades, and the vodka burns off in your bloodstream, leaving behind a strange stillness. No shouting, no crashing goblets, no sudden executions, just the soft click of wooden sandals on stone, the hush of paper sliding in a screen door, and the faint scent of pine and smoke curling through the mist. You're in Kyoto now, Edo period Japan. The air is clean, maybe too clean. After Ivan, this feels like rehab in a monastery. But don't get comfortable. You're about to learn that silence doesn't mean safety, it just means the knife is hidden better. You're in the private quarters of a shogun's palace, not the emperor. He's technically still around, but mostly ceremonial by now. No, the shogun is the true power, the military dictator in silk robes, controlling the land from behind lacquered screens and sharp etiquette. You're seated cross-legged on a tatami mat, legs already tingling, facing a low lacquered table. The room is sparse, serene, and beautiful in that way that makes you feel guilty just breathing too loudly. But there on the table, perfectly placed, exquisitely balanced, is a small porcelain cup filled with sake. The sake is warm, clear, and light. Nothing like vodka or mead. It doesn't try to destroy your liver in one gulp. It creeps in gently. Like a story told in whispers, you sip, smooth, almost floral, with a quiet bite at the end. A servant bows so low you worry his forehead might leave a dent in the floor, then fills your cup again without a word. You nod back, trying to copy the bow. You fail. That's okay. They expect foreigners to be clumsy. Tonight is not a wild banquet. It's a private gathering, a drinking night for the elite few invited by the shogun himself. No one speaks above a hush. Conversation is careful, deliberate. The room is lit by paper lanterns, casting soft shadows on the walls, where painted cranes drift across golden screens. This is elegance as intimidation. No mess, no noise, just precision. Every movement, every word is measured, and behind every smile 1,000 possible insults lie, waiting to be unearthed. You glance at the shogun. He is calm, inscrutable, draped in dark silk and seated higher than everyone else. He lifts his cup and the others follow. You do too. A toast is made. Short, poetic, probably layered with double meaning. Everyone drinks, and no one speaks until he does again. Here's a historical gem for you. Sake wasn't just a drink in feudal Japan. It was a tool of statecraft. There were entire sake rituals performed at political meetings, marriage arrangements, even declarations of war. The Sansan Kudo tradition, for instance, involved sipping from 3 different cups, 3 times each, sealing alliances as sacred as blood. You weren't just drinking, you were binding yourself to another's fate. And the shoguns? They knew how to use this. Sake was poured by servants with coded etiquette. Pouring your own drink? Rude. Not drinking when someone pours for you? Suspicious. Letting someone pour sake without offering to return the favour? Practically treasonous. These weren't just manners, they were psychological minefields. In a room full of samurai and schemers, misreading a refill could get you quietly escorted out, and not in the "thank you for coming" way. There's a little-known fringe detail. Certain elite gatherings in Kyoto were said to involve shadow games, where nobles, masked and anonymous, exchange secrets while sipping specially brewed sake infused with rare herbs. These games, held in tea-houses behind Zen gardens, blurred the line between gossip and espionage. Some say entire assassinations were ordered through poems written in rice wine on slips of silk, read once and burned in the brazier. Fringe? Maybe. But Japan did invent the ninja. You'd be a fool not to believe in a little hidden theatre. As for scholarly debate, some argue that the shogunate's drinking rituals were actually meant to keep people sober, or at least sober enough to be held accountable. Unlike the Western drink until you forget your name royal style, these events focused on control. You were expected to feel the alcohol, sure, but not to show it. Drunkenness was weakness. Mistakes could mean death. Or worse, dishonour. Others contend that sake played a more permissive role than it looks, and that the real difference was cultural polish, not actual moderation. You take another sip. The shogun glances your way. You nod too quickly. Someone across the room chuckles behind a fan. A servant starts playing a koto, the slow notes curling through the room like incense. A woman in crimson silk begins a slow, hypnotic dance. It's not sexy, it's ritualistic. Every hand movement, every blink choreographed centuries ago. You watch, unsure if this is art or a message. The shogun smiles faintly. Then he speaks. He tells a story. A parable, maybe. About a falcon who refuses to fly no matter how fine his cage or how lavish his meals. The other birds laugh. Then one day the falcon flies and doesn't return. The room nods in quiet reverence. You think you get it. Maybe not. It doesn't matter. You sip again, and then, without warning, the tension shifts. A samurai beside the door coughs. Another follows. The shogun's eyes narrow. A tray is removed. A drink refilled. Nothing is said. But you can feel it. Something has gone wrong, or maybe it hasn't. That's the trick of a world this smooth. You never know if the sword is still sheathed. The night goes on, sake keeps flowing, but no one seems drunk. Faces stay composed, backs remain straight. No food fight, no singing, no political meltdowns. But make no mistake, this room is just as dangerous as Ivan's vodka-drenched death parties. Maybe more. At least with Ivan, you could see the violence coming. Here, you leave and only realize you are threatened halfway home. By the time the lanterns dim and the guests begin to bow their farewells, your legs are numb, your nerves are electric, and your head is floating. You're led out through a corridor of stone lanterns and bonsai trees, the hush of crickets the only sound in the air. You survived. Probably. And just as you exhale, the servant at your side murmurs, "The shogun was pleased. You drank well." You blink. It's the highest compliment you could receive. It's also a warning. Next time don't slip. But tonight, you're safe. Mostly. Next we head west again, to England, where Henry VIII has a leg of boar in one hand, a flagon of wine in the other, and zero concern for anything resembling restraint. Hope you're ready to party Tudor style. You're ripped from the tranquility of Kyoto and slammed, quite rudely, into the thundering halls of Tudor England. It smells like spit-roasted meat, smoke, and the unchecked ego of a man who has married 6 women and still thinks the problem isn't him. Welcome to the court of Henry VIII, where subtlety is dead, moderation was never born, and if you're not drinking, dancing, or plotting someone's downfall, what are you even doing with your evening? The room is massive, wood-panelled, hung with heavy tapestries depicting royal hunts, battles, and the occasional saint just to keep up appearances. The fire roars in the hearth. A boar's head sits on the banquet table, complete with an apple shoved rudely in its mouth, and nearby are enough pies, puddings, and roasted birds to feed an army. Or at least the king's appetite, which tonight is as endless as his thirst. And there he is, Henry himself. You can't miss him. He's enormous in every sense, physically imposing, decked out in gold-embroidered velvet, and enough fur to clothe a small village, his face ruddy with heat and drink. His goblet is bigger than your head, and it's already been filled twice since you walked in. He turns toward you with that famous twinkle in his eye, the one that says, "I might knight you or execute you depending on how this turkey leg tastes," and raises his goblet in greeting. You bow, deeper. Good. You may live through this. Wine flows like a waterfall, rich, red and heavy. It's imported from France or Spain, unless England's at war with them this week, in which case it's local stuff that tastes like regret. Henry doesn't care. He's on his 3rd cup before you finish your first. The man drinks like he's trying to wash away every bad decision, starting with wife number 1, and moving briskly through numbers 2 and 3. Here's the historical anchor. Henry VIII was not just a partier. He was a man who turned indulgence into policy. His court was one of the most extravagant in Europe, and drinking played a central role. Feasts lasted hours, sometimes days. There were formal toasts, sure, but mostly there was sheer volume. Ale at breakfast, claret with lunch, and something sweet and spiced to carry you into the night. The man burned through barrels like most people burn through candles, but there's more to it. Henry wasn't just drinking for the buzz, he was performing. Every gulp, every exaggerated laugh, every drunken danwig was calculated to show the court that he was powerful, vibrant, and, most importantly, divinely favoured. Kings didn't get hangovers, they got inspiration, or so the propaganda went. Now, here's a strange little Tudor nugget. The court had a job called the groom of the stool, a personal attendant who, yes, helped the king relieve himself, but also managed his food and drink. The groom kept detailed notes of Henry's digestion and alcohol intake. Think of it as royal health tracking, 16th century style. If Henry drank too much sack and got sluggish, it was noted. If he skipped a cup of mead, everyone panicked. Balance was key, except when it wasn't. Meanwhile, Henry continues to drink and joke and flirt with anything that moves. You're seated near the minstrels, who are doing their best to compete with the volume of laughter and clinking goblets. A jester tumbles across the floor, narrowly avoiding a duck leg hurled by some drunken lord trying to impress Lady Somebody or other. The floor is sticky with spilled wine and shame. There's an edge to the fun, though, always, because this is Henry, and he doesn't just drink for joy, he drinks to assert dominance. He wants to see who can keep up, who can laugh when he laughs, who dares to look too serious, or not serious enough. You sip cautiously. Your cup is refilled without asking, again and again. Suddenly Henry calls for a dance. "A pavan," he roars, and everyone scrambles to their feet. You're dragged into a line of courtiers, the music begins, and you're forced to remember dance steps you definitely never learned. Henry leads, naturally, wobbling a bit, his face flushed, but still surprisingly nimble for a man who eats entire swans. When he slips and nearly knocks over a duchess, the room holds its breath. He laughs. So does everyone else. You laugh too. Good. Your head remains on your shoulders, and then there's the open secret, the scholarly debate that still pops up in Tudor studies like an uninvited guest. Some historians believe Henry's excessive drinking, especially in his later years, contributed to his physical and mental decline. His ulcers worsened, his paranoia deepened, and his famously mercurial mood swings became dangerous. Others argue his behaviour was more about personality than alcohol, that Henry simply was that man, bombastic, insecure, and deeply aware of the performance that kingship required. Either way, you're watching it happen in real time. His charm shifts, moment to moment. 1 minute he's singing, a deep, rumbling tune about lost love, possibly directed at Anne Boleyn's ghost. The next, he's glaring at a noble who whispered too close to a lady's ear. "Do I bore you?" he growls. The room freezes. The noble fumbles for a reply, but Henry waves it off. "I jest," he booms. The laughter returns, but a little too loud, a little too fast. Later, the food's cleared and the goblets are stacked like trophies. Henry is half asleep on his throne-like chair, one hand still gripping a half-full flagon. His breath rattles in his chest. A servant leans over to dab sweat from his brow. You can't tell if he's dreaming or planning his next marriage proposal. Possibly both. You sneak out when the candles burn low, stepping past guards who pretend not to notice you stumbling slightly. Outside, the night is cool, and the silence is a relief. You made it. No marriage, no execution, just a little wine fog and a whole lot of insight into how absolute power gets very, very drunk. But don't get too cozy. The Tudors aren't done yet. Up next, Elizabeth I, and while she may be the Virgin Queen, her gin-soaked evenings were anything but innocent. The air shifts again, not in temperature this time, but in tone. Gone is the sweaty testosterone and turkey leg energy of Henry's halls. Instead, everything is sharper, cooler. The fire is still there, but it burns behind the eyes now, not in the belly. You find yourself in a more refined court, less brawny, more brainy, but make no mistake, no less dangerous. This is the reign of Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, and while she might have publicly clutched her pearls, behind the courtly dances and stiff collars were candlelit rooms full of witty banter, thinly veiled threats, and glasses of gin that hit harder than royal edicts. You're in Whitehall Palace, standing near the fringes of a grand hall dressed in silks and silver. Everything here gleams, but nothing is soft. The men are powdered and polished, the women adorned in impossible layers of fabric and jewels that jingle just enough to let you know they've arrived. And at the centre of it all, commanding the room with the ease of a seasoned general and the grace of a trained actor, is Elizabeth. She's not lounging. She's not staggering. She's standing, tall, fierce, and very much aware of everyone and everything around her. She raises a slender jewelled glass, not wine, not ale, but gin, clear and biting, infused with herbs so bitter you think your tongue might stage a rebellion. A toast to poetry or politics, or both. Because in Elizabeth's world, those were the same thing. You sip, taste like flowers that have read Machiavelli. One historical fact stands clear. Elizabeth was no fool when it came to appearances. Publicly, she kept the virgin narrative front and centre, as much for political strategy as for branding. But privately, she was sharp-tongued, cunning, and absolutely capable of matching drink for drink with the men of her court. Gin, recently introduced from the continent, became a court favourite here, whiter than the heavy wines and meads of her father's time, but no less potent when you weren't watering it down for the guests. The evenings were quieter than Henry's feasts, but they cut deeper. You weren't expected to shout or belch or knock over a candelabra, You were expected to entertain, say something clever, witty, dangerous even if your timing was right. You sit near the edge of a group of courtiers playing a game of poetic insults. The rules are simple: rhyme, flatter, and humiliate in equal measure. You watch as a young noble delivers a thinly veiled jab at a rival's thinning hair, cloaked in Shakespearean verse. The room erupts in polite, vicious laughter. Elizabeth herself joins in, of course. She's not the type to sit back and be flattered without returning fire. She sips her gin and replies with a line so pointed it practically slices through the air, aimed squarely at a visiting diplomat who dared suggest England might benefit from a royal husband. The poor man turns a shade paler. You nod slowly. She doesn't need a sword. She is one. But the Virgin Queen isn't immune to indulgence. In her private chambers, more intimate gatherings, just the trusted few, the gin flows more freely. The gowns are less armoured, the conversation looser. You're in one now, seated in a room lit by dozens of beeswax candles, the air perfumed with rosemary and lavender, and your host lounging across from you in a silken robe that still somehow looks regal. She lifts her glass and grins, a rare, genuine moment. "Tell me a lie," she says, voice smooth, "and make it beautiful." You try, you fail. She laughs, you're refilled. Here's a quirky detail you might not expect. Elizabeth was rumoured to favour flavoured spirits: rose, clove, even violet. Recipes circulated in the court, small batch distillations designed specifically for her tastes. Some were laced with herbs meant to lift the mind, others with ingredients that would now land you on a controlled substances list. Her apothecaries walked a fine line between medicine and mischief, but not everyone loved this side of the Queen. Some of her Protestant advisers, staunch, puritanical, and grim-faced, frowned at the lavish nighttime revelries, no matter how intellectual they seemed. They whispered that the Queen's favourites, men like Robert Dudley and Christopher Hatton, had too much influence, too much wine, and too many liberties. But Elizabeth never cared much for whispers, unless she was the one whispering them. Scholars continue to debate the extent of Elizabeth's private indulgences. Was she truly a calculating teetotaler playing the court like a chessboard, or was she simply clever enough to keep her nights out of the public eye? Some argue her carefully managed image as the untouchable Queen was a mask worn over a fiercely curious, often indulgent human being who knew exactly how much gin she could get away with behind closed doors. Others say she needed those nights to survive the pressure of rule, to unwind the coils of diplomacy, religion, and assassination threats wrapped around her throne. Back in the chamber, the mood has shifted again. Someone starts singing, a lute player with a voice like smoke. And Elizabeth, no longer laughing, watches the flames in the hearth. Her glass is empty. She doesn't refill it. Not yet. There's a sadness here, or maybe just strategy. You realise she's always performing, even in her most intimate moments. Every word measured, every sip calculated, because even the Virgin Queen has to balance being a woman in a world that demands a god. Later, as you're shown out through a corridor of silent guards and staring portraits, you feel the contrast with her father's court. Henry drank to forget. Elizabeth drinks to remember, to think, to sharpen, to weaponize her wit. The gin is a blade she keeps polished, just one of many. And don't get too sentimental, because next you're heading to France. Not just France, Versailles, where Louis XIV throws parties that make Henry's feasts look like picnics, and where wine becomes religion, performance, and fire hazard all at once. The soft candlelight of Elizabethan chambers fades, and when your eyes adjust, the glow becomes blinding. Gold everywhere. Gold walls, gold chandeliers, gold embroidery on outfits so elaborate you can hear them rustling when someone breathes. You've stepped into Versailles, the glittering, ego-drenched jewel of Louis XIV's France. And if you thought royalty liked a good drink before, you haven't seen what happens when divinity starts believing its own press. This isn't a palace, it's a living opera. And tonight's performance? The nightly drinking ritual of the Sun King and his exquisitely overdressed entourage. It smells like expensive perfume, melted wax, roasted quail and sweet white burgundy wine. The air is hot, choked almost, from so many bodies packed into rooms designed more for spectacle than comfort. You can already feel the wine sweating through your skin, and you haven't even lifted your glass. Louis XIV doesn't walk in, he arrives. He is the sun, after all. His entrance is choreographed. Trumpets, velvet drapes, a hush of awe so practiced it might as well be pre-recorded. He's dressed in silk so luminous you have to squint. He's powdered to perfection, his wig a towering, curled monument to royal overcompensation, and in his gloved hand a goblet filled with a wine so exclusive it's rumoured only to be served if the king personally approves the barrel. You're ushered to the side of the Hall of Mirrors. Yes, that Hall of Mirrors, where history will one day be made and broken. But tonight it's just a backdrop for courtly drinking, where nobles laugh too loudly and clink glasses with carefully rehearsed grace. Wine flows in thin streams from crystal decanters held by liveried servants who look like they were grown in a vineyard. You're handed a glass of golden sauterne, sweet as nectar, and cold enough to feel like mercy on your tongue. Here's the thing about Louis. His drinking rituals weren't just indulgent, they were weaponized. Every sip was performance. Every toast was a loyalty test. He didn't binge like a Viking or bellow like Henry. He curated. Drinking in his court was an art, just like dancing, fencing, or speaking in flawless compliments. The more elegantly you handled your wine, the more favour you might win. Spill your glass, prepare for social death, laugh at the wrong joke, start updating your will. Historical fact. Louis XIV's court consumed staggering amounts of alcohol. Not just wine, but liqueurs, brandy, even medicinal cordials disguised as health tonics. But unlike his father, who reportedly drank heavily and without finesse, Louis wrapped his drinking in layers of etiquette. He wanted to be seen as divine, yes, but also as the perfect host, the master of the universe who could hold his liquor with the same poise he used to hold absolute power. The fringe detail. There's a rumour, circulated in whispers and scandal sheets, that Louis commissioned a secret wine blend infused with aphrodisiacs, served only during select evening gatherings. Whether it was real or just a story to spice up Versailles gossip is unclear, but let's just say some of those late-night salons had a reputation for ending with doors closed and reputations shredded. One duchess supposedly fainted after 3 glasses. The court blamed the corset. You suspect otherwise. But not everyone played the game well. Versailles was a court of sharks in powdered wigs, and if you slipped up, said the wrong thing, drank too little or too much, failed to flatter the king at the right moment, you'd find yourself reassigned to some miserable country estate faster than you could say, "More claret, please." Louis didn't have to yell, he had banishment, and that was far worse. There's still debate among historians about how sincere all this elegance really was. Some argue that the wine-drenched rituals were meant to disguise the rot beneath. Economic crises, political repression, a court so obsessed with itself it forgot how to rule. Others insist Louis truly believed in the spectacle, that his divine right included the divine art of good taste. Either way, the result was the same. Nights like this, where beauty and power got drunk together and left behind the shattered lives of those who couldn't keep up. You move through the room, following the scent of fresh pastries and heated ambition. A nobleman with impossibly high heels and a powdered face offers you a glass of vin de champagne, still, not bubbly yet. This is pre-sparkle champagne. He toasts to the king's immortal taste, and you clink glasses, trying not to spill. He watches you too closely. This isn't a toast, it's a test. Suddenly, music starts. Violins, flutes, a harpsichord. A dance is forming. Not wild or romantic, but tightly choreographed like the drinking, each step precise, each movement meant to flatter someone watching. Louis smiles faintly and sips his wine without looking down. He never spills, he never stumbles. If he did, no one would mention it. But you know he doesn't. He's been practicing for decades. Then something shifts. A noblewoman, gorgeous, glittering, laughs a little too loudly. Her glass slips. Red wine spills onto her gown, holds gasps, whispers. The music hiccups but doesn't stop. The king's eyes flicker to her. A servant moves instantly, blotting the stain, refilling her glass, bowing so low he might dislocate something. The woman laughs again, trying to make light of it. But you know, she won't be here next week. That's Versailles for you. Nothing is small, nothing is private. Every move, every sip, every word is recorded, repeated, and eventually weaponized. Drinking here isn't escape, it's exposure. And the more you drink, the more likely you are to reveal something fatal. You step outside finally onto a marble balcony. The gardens stretch into the night. Perfectly trimmed, perfectly pointless. You breathe in the cool air and glance back at the glowing palace. Still bright, still alive, Still drinking. And if you think this is the peak of opulence, think again, because next you're going north again, into colder lands and colder hearts, Imperial Russia, where vodka flows like a river and the Tsars treat sobriety as a personal insult. The golden halls of Versailles dissolve into frost. And just like that, the warmth is gone. You're in Russia again, but this isn't the medieval storm cloud of Ivan the Terrible. This is the 18th century now, under the rule of a man who believes drinking isn't a pastime but a matter of national policy. Welcome to the court of Peter the Great, where vodka flows like holy water. The line between revelry and tyranny is paper thin, and hangovers come with imperial consequences. You step into the Tsar's banquet hall and it hits you immediately. The cold, yes, but also the volume. Laughter, shouting, glass clinking against glass, boots pounding the floor in a makeshift dance. This isn't refined Versailles etiquette. This is a drinking contest wrapped in a diplomatic summit, performed by a man who is 6.5 feet tall, wild-eyed and already halfway through a toast that involves threatening Sweden. Peter the Great doesn't sit at the head of the table. He stomps around it, cup in hand, personally refilling guests' drinks from a jug that smells like it could strip varnish. He slaps backs, roars in approval, then suddenly turns stone-faced when someone hesitates to take a sip, and there you are, near the far end, cup trembling in your fingers as Peter himself looms toward you like a one-man thunderclap. You drink, you do not hesitate. Good, that's rule 1. Here's the truth. Peter the Great loved alcohol with an energy usually reserved for military invasions and total governmental overhauls, which is, incidentally, what he spent the other half of his time doing. He modernized Russia, violently, forcefully, but made sure there was always room for a drink at the table, or 10, and unlike some monarchs who hid their vices behind polished manners, Peter wore his intoxication like a badge. Historical fact incoming. Peter established the all-joking, all-drunken Synod of Fools and Jesters, a drinking club that parodied church rituals and celebrated unfiltered debauchery. Yes, that's real. Yes, it had official membership, robes and rituals. And yes, it involved a lot of vodka. These weren't just parties, they were the public mockeries of conservative institutions, a middle finger to the old order dressed up in ribbons and hungover philosophy. If you wanted to be part of Peter's inner circle, you needed a liver of iron and a complete lack of shame. The vodka being poured tonight is homemade, brutally strong, and comes in ceramic jugs with no labels. There are no vintages, no fancy corkscrews. It's all poured, splashed, and consumed in volume. You're on your 4th shot and starting to see double. The nobles around you are slurring toasts in half-finished Latin, while one general starts singing a song about Catherine, unclear whether it's the future empress or just a very talented tavern girl. Peter climbs onto the table and roars a toast to progress and to better boots. The entire room echoes back and a new round is poured. You barely manage to stay upright. Your neighbour, a red-nosed admiral with only 4 teeth left, tells you that if you can outdrink the Tsar, he'll make you a duke. Then he promptly falls asleep face first in his own soup. But this isn't just chaos. It's controlled chaos. Peter uses these parties like a scalpel or a wrecking ball depending on the guest list. He watches how people behave when the drinks flow, who gets too bold, who stays quiet, who gossips about reforms, who to promote, who to reassign to Siberia. There's a fringe legend about one night in particular, a feast so soaked in alcohol that several ambassadors passed out under the table, only to wake the next morning wearing women's dresses and sign treaties they couldn't remember agreeing to. Some say Peter deliberately kept the drinks flowing to get political concessions. Others say it was just Tuesday. Scholars still debate the psychological roots of Peter's drinking habits. Was it indulgence, trauma, or pure strategy? He watched his own relatives die in palace coups. He grew up in a court riddled with fear and backwardness. When he finally seized power, he wielded drinking like a psychological weapon, bonding with allies, breaking down barriers and humiliating enemies, all over a shared jug of vodka. Some call it madness, others call it genius. Either way, you don't say no when he offers a refill. The drinking games go on. One nobleman is told to toast using only words that rhyme with Tsar. He fails. Another is forced to recite a poem while balancing a full goblet on his head. He succeeds. Barely. Someone tries to dance and vomits mid-twirl. Peter laughs so hard he chokes on his drink. A doctor, probably also drunk, offers leeches. Everyone cheers. The room is a blur now. Candlelight smearing across your vision, music pounding in your ears, and Peter's laughter booming louder than anything else. He moves through the crowd like a bear in a ballroom, unpredictable and unstoppable. He kisses a Dutch diplomat on the forehead, pours wine into a general's boot, then smashes his own goblet for emphasis. It's not just drinking, it's theatre. And you're part of the cast whether you like it or not. Eventually the night begins to wind down. The palace staff has quietly removed the unconscious guests and laid blankets near the walls for anyone who can't find the door. You're among the last to remain upright, staring blearily at a plate of herring that seems to be judging you. Peter, somehow still vertical, raises one final toast. "To change," he growls, "even when it tastes like fire." You drink, and this time it does taste like fire. As the party fades and you're led out into the icy night, you feel your brain trying to reboot. Your ears ring, your breath steams in the cold air, and your hands shake, not from the cold but from something else, from the knowledge that you just survived a royal drinking night where fun and power were the same thing, where vodka was truth serum and a loyalty test and a death sentence all in one. And yet somehow it's about to get weirder, because now we're heading to a castle built like a fairy tale, ruled by a king who drinks alone, sings to himself, and throws moonlit parties for imaginary guests. Next up, Mad King Ludwig of Bavaria. Bring a cape. The howling winds of Russia fade, the vodka still sloshing around somewhere behind your eyes, and suddenly you're someplace different. Quieter, softer, stranger. A full moon glows overhead, reflecting off the still surface of a lake that mirrors the stars so perfectly it's hard to tell which way is up. You're in Bavaria now, high in the German Alps, and directly ahead of you, impossible and glowing like a fever dream, is Neuschwanstein Castle. It looks less like a fortress, and more like someone asked a child to draw what a magic king's house should look like, than actually built it. Welcome to the world of King Ludwig II. Strap in, he's not like the others. You're led through vaulted marble halls, echoing with nothing but your own footsteps. No crowds, no generals, no orgies or roaring fires. This is drinking at its most bizarre, quiet, isolated, and entirely on the king's own terms. The air smells like beeswax, roses, and something faintly metallic. Servants glide past you like ghosts, silent, emotionless, trained to blend into the architecture. Everything is staged, but the show? It's just for him, and tonight, for reasons known only to Ludwig, you're part of it. You're brought to a long, narrow dining hall lit entirely by candelabras, suspended from ceilings high enough to summon birds. The table is set for dozens, but only 2 places are arranged. One for you, one for the king. You sit confused, and then you hear it. Music, not a band, not a recording. Wagner. Played on a hidden mechanism somewhere inside the walls. The castle itself is singing. Then he arrives. King Ludwig II of Bavaria. The fairy tale king floats into the room like he's stepped off the stage of an opera. He's tall, pale, wrapped in midnight blue velvet embroidered with stars as if he's trying to become the night sky. His eyes are distant, dream-heavy, and his smile is just a little too wide. He sits, gestures, and the wine is poured. It's red. Very red. Probably too red. You sip. It's heavy, perfumed, slightly herbal. Not just wine, prepared wine, mulled, spiced, medicinal. You're not sure, but it's strong, and weirdly comforting. The silence stretches just long enough to become unsettling. And then Ludwig speaks, not to you, to the empty chair across from him. He toasts to Lohengrin. You blink. The opera character. He smiles, lifts his glass again and says, "And to Parsifal, my faithful knight." This is not a gag. He is absolutely, unironically drinking with fictional people. Welcome to the most lonely, beautiful, and deeply unhinged royal drinking night in history. Here's your historical anchor. Ludwig was obsessed with myth, with legend, with opera, especially the works of Richard Wagner, who he idolized to the point of bankrupting the Bavarian treasury just to build theatres and castles in his honor. He saw himself as a spiritual king, not bound by politics or practicality. He didn't want to rule, he wanted to dream. And when reality failed to match the world inside his head, he drank, slowly, ritually, and with people who didn't exist. There's no raucous laughter here, no toasts to war or victory or blood. Ludwig's drinking nights were melancholic affairs, soaked in music and fantasy. He'd host dinners for 1, sometimes 2, always at midnight or later. The servants would set places for imaginary guests, Wagner, Lohengrin, the moon. He'd converse with them, toast them, and drink in silence while the stars turned overhead and no one dared interrupt. Now, a fringe detail. Rumours circulated that Ludwig had developed a ritual involving moonlight and wine. He'd only drink if the moonlight struck the goblet at a certain angle. Some dismissed it as poetic nonsense. Others, including a few palace staff, swore it was real. They'd been ordered to adjust window drapes by the minute, or even polish goblets to change the light's reflection, all to meet the king's very specific, very mystical drinking criteria. But beneath the theatricality was a deeper story. Ludwig was struggling, likely mentally ill. Scholars debate whether it was schizophrenia, depression, or something else entirely. He withdrew from governance and reality alike. His drinking wasn't about excess, it was about escape. A way to dissolve into the dream where he ruled not over politicians and rebels, but over a kingdom of swans, knights, and endless moonlit forests. There's still a debate among historians about whether Ludwig was a genius trapped in the wrong century, or a broken soul crushed by the weight of inherited responsibility. Some say he was an artist king, far ahead of his time, who used wine and music as the only language he could truly speak. Others argue he was dangerously unfit for rule, a fantasist whose drinking habits were just one piece of a tragic slow-motion collapse. Back in the dining hall, you're on your 3rd glass. The wine has become warmer, more potent. The candlelight dances in the facets of the cut crystal, and Ludwig is telling a story now, something about a lake, a swan, and a crown made of ice. His voice is low, hypnotic. You don't interrupt. You don't dare. Somewhere during his monologue, he raises his glass again and mutters, "To those who never existed, but were more real than the rest." You drink, and then he stands suddenly. The music swells behind the walls. He walks toward the window, opens it, and stares at the moon. You follow cautiously. The view is unreal, mountain peaks bathed in silver, forests stretching forever, and silence so deep you can hear the snow falling. Ludwig leans forward and whispers, "They say I'm mad." He turns to you. "But have you seen what passes for sanity out there?" You have. You've drunk with Ivan, you've danced with Henry, you nod. He laughs, softly, sadly. Then the goblet is empty, and the night is done. You're escorted out without ceremony. The castle stands behind you, glowing like a dream someone refused to wake up from. It feels like you've stepped out of a fairy tale written by someone who knew how it ended, and kept writing anyway. Next, it's back to France. But this time the party's over. The guillotine's getting warmed up and the wine's flowing faster than ever in a desperate bid to forget what's coming. Hope you're not too attached to your head. The moonlit romance of Bavaria fades like breath on glass, and you land hard. Back in France, but this time the mood is very different. The air is hot, thick, almost feverish. Versailles still stands in the distance, but it no longer gleams. The gold is tarnished, the halls are cracked with tension, and the faces around you have smiles stretched a little too wide. You're in the final days before the French Revolution, and the nobility is doing what nobility does best when the world is crumbling, drinking like it will somehow stop the guillotine. You're at one of the last grand banquets of the Ancien Régime, the old order, that fragile, glittering mess of powdered wigs, impossible gowns, and unchecked arrogance. The palace tonight is packed with dukes, duchesses, cardinals, and bored aristocrats, all pretending they can't hear the mob screaming for bread just beyond the garden walls. Inside, the chandeliers still blaze, and the wine still flows, but the laughter has a hollow ring, like it's echoing down a hallway that doesn't lead anywhere. You're seated near the centre of the table. The food is ridiculous. Ortolan bunting cooked in brandy, flaming desserts that threaten to take someone's wig off, and foie gras sculpted into the shape of a guillotine as a joke. Too soon? Yes, definitely too soon. And then there's the wine. It's everywhere. Bordeaux, Burgundy, Champagne, glasses filled, drained, filled again. Even the servants are drinking, either out of numbness or because no one's sober enough to notice. One count is on his 6th toast of the evening. "To liberty!" he shouts, to mocking cheers. "To equality!" More laughter. "To the Third Estate, may they remember their plate!" Roars of approval. The room is drunk on wine, but also on denial. That sweet, sick high you get when everything is clearly ending and you just choose not to see it. Here's your historical anchor. In the years just before the Revolution, the French nobility went into overdrive. Extravagant parties, rivers of wine, nightly feasts that cost more than a peasant's yearly wages. It was part arrogance, part desperation. The court could feel the tension rising, grain shortages, economic collapse, rising taxes, and instead of pulling back, they doubled down on decadence. It was like watching a ship take on water and throwing a ball in the ballroom instead of fixing the hull. At some of these final parties, nobles wore mock peasant costumes, drinking from tin cups as a joke, while actual peasants were starving just outside the gates. One marquis famously had a drinking night where the wine was served in hollowed-out loaves of bread for irony. He was beheaded 6 months later. Timing matters. The fringe detail? Whispered among the servants was the existence of the Last Cellar, a private wine store beneath Versailles, accessible only to high-ranking courtiers, filled with bottles dating back a century or more. It was opened during these final days, and supposedly the nobles drank it dry in under a week. Some believe it was symbolic, a last indulgence, a final middle finger to fate. Others say it was just what they'd always done, consume without consequence, but there were consequences. The room around you is growing louder, hotter. A noblewoman knocks over a decanter and laughs like it's the funniest thing that's ever happened. Her companion toasts to the people, and everyone cackles, some nervously, others with open contempt. You glance toward the window and see the distant flicker of torches, not candles, torches. Outside, Paris is boiling over. Inside, the aristocracy is drinking itself blind. There's debate among historians about whether these final banquets were as wild as described. Some argue the stories were exaggerated after the fall, propaganda to justify the bloodshed. Others point to detailed records of food orders, wine consumption, and servant accounts that suggest these parties really did spiral into grotesque self-parody. Either way, it doesn't change the feeling in the room. The music's playing, but the floor's already collapsing. Suddenly a toast is proposed to Madame Guillotine. It's meant as a joke. Everyone laughs. You don't. Because you know what they don't yet. You know what's coming. A group begins a drinking game. Guess the revolution date. The winner gets a bottle of vintage champagne. The loser is dared to give a speech pretending to be Robespierre. You think they're mocking him. They think they're untouchable. You sip your wine and try not to scream. Across the room, the king's brother is singing a patriotic song off-key. The duchess next to him fans herself furiously and whispers that it's all a phase and that the rabble will calm down. You nod, slowly. Sure, any day now. The wine hits harder as the night drags on. You're buzzed, then drunk, then past drunk into something more surreal. The chandeliers blur, the laughter feels farther away. The powdered faces seem more like masks now, painted smiles stretched across fear. These people don't just want to drink, they need to, because if they stop, if they sober up for even 1 minute, they'll have to face it. The kingdom is dying, and they're the reason. Later, you wander out into a corridor, stumbling over a fallen goblet, past a servant who's crying but pretending not to. You step out into the garden. The roses are still blooming. The fountains still burble like nothing's wrong. But over the walls, you can hear it clearly now. Chants, shouts, the rhythmic sound of boots. The sun's about to rise. On a republic. And as the first scream from the streets reaches your ears, you turn back to see the party still going. One final toast. One last gulp of wine. One last desperate attempt to pretend the dream isn't ending. But it is. And next, you'll be standing with one of its stars, Marie Antoinette herself, as she drinks and dances in a secret garden, while revolution curls like smoke around her feet. The roar of the crowd fades, but not completely. It lingers behind you, like thunder that refuses to leave the sky. You're not in the palace anymore, not in the echoing halls of gilded oblivion. You're somewhere smaller now, quieter, deceptively calm. Welcome to the Petit Trianon, Marie Antoinette's private retreat, nestled in the gardens of Versailles. It's dainty, serene, almost theatrical in its cuteness, like someone tried to design peace itself. But beneath the lavender and rose-scented air is something bitter, something desperate. The Queen is drinking tonight, not with pomp and spectacle, but with a softness that suggests she's trying to convince herself nothing's wrong. You're seated under a trellis lit by dozens of paper lanterns, their glow flickering like trapped fireflies. The night smells of lilac and fresh-cut grass. The still summer air, thick with the hum of insects and a tension no one's acknowledging. Around you are the queens in a circle, ladies in towering hairstyles decorated with miniature ships, musicians plucking delicate melodies on hidden harps, courtiers too fashionable to feel guilty. Everyone here is pretending the world is still intact. Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, slips into the garden like a ghost in white muslin. She's dressed not as a monarch, but as a shepherdess, one of her favourite roles in this strange theatre of denial. She smiles, the kind of smile that's been practised in front of mirrors for years. She sits, she drinks, champagne of course, served in delicate crystal flutes, cold enough to numb the fear if you drink quickly. You follow her lead. This isn't her first bottle of the night. Here's the historical anchor. The Petit Trianon was Marie Antoinette's escape hatch from the suffocating formalities of Versailles. She didn't want the rigid etiquette, the eyes watching her every breath, the endless whispers about her Austrian blood and spending habits. So she built her own world, a fantasy of simplicity and elegance, and naturally it included wine. Not in torrents, but as part of the performance. Even in retreat, royalty still drinks like they're being watched. She raises her glass to no one in particular and laughs at a joke someone didn't quite finish. You sip your champagne, dry, crisp, expensive enough to fund an entire peasant village, and glance around at the other guests. They're tipsy, giggling, sprawled lazily on silk cushions. A harpsichord plays something slow and mournful, and a young noblewoman recites poetry about lost summer days while her husband pretends not to cry. Feels like the party after the funeral, only no one has admitted the death yet. Marie reaches for a second glass, and for a moment her hand trembles. She stills it quickly, glances at you and says, "Don't look so serious. The revolution isn't coming tonight." The others laugh. You're not sure if she meant it as a joke. Now here's a fringe detail that never made it into the powdered pastel paintings. The Queen had a secret wine cellar beneath the Trianon. Not enormous, not ostentatious, just her personal stash. Carefully curated, small batches, bottles sent from Austrian vineyards, sweet wines from Hungary, light reds from Burgundy. Some claim she would sneak down there alone, sit in the cool dark, and drink in silence when the palace walls became too loud. No attendants, no music, just wine and her thoughts. Whether she was hiding from court or her own reflection is still up for debate. And debate they do. Scholars are divided over Marie Antoinette's drinking habits. Was she a frivolous lush, swanning around with a goblet in hand while France starved? Or was she just a young woman, married into a country that hated her, using wine as a tiny act of resistance, or maybe just a salve for a life she never really chose? What's clear is that she did something to earn her infamy, and drinking in the Petit Trianon with her pretend shepherdess village and curated company didn't help her case. You notice that the conversation has started to tilt. The jokes are getting sharper. One courtier laughs about the Queen's head on a coin, better that than on a pike. The table chuckles nervously. Marie rolls her eyes and says, "Oh, let them shout, Paris loves a tantrum." But her glass is suddenly empty, and the servant is a little too slow in refilling it. And now the singing starts. Not cheerful, not bawdy, a soft, aching ballad about lost love and early death. Marie joins in, her voice surprisingly strong, clear, and filled with something you didn't expect. Regret? Maybe. Longing? Probably. She finishes her verse, lifts her glass, and says, "To simplicity." Everyone echoes her. You're not sure if they mean it or if they're just tired of pretending. As the evening drags deeper into the night, the champagne runs dry. Wine follows, then liqueurs, poured in delicate glasses shaped like tulips. The Queen is tipsy now, her cheeks flushed, her posture softer, the strain in her eyes momentarily softened. She whispers something to one of her ladies and they both collapse into laughter, tipping their glasses together so carelessly they spill across the silk. No one bothers to clean it up. It's not debauchery. It's something worse. Avoidance. Every guest here knows what's happening outside the gardens. Bread riots, revolutionary pamphlets, rumours of heads on pikes. But inside this bubble, the party grinds on because if they stop drinking, they'll have to start listening. The Queen stands a little too quickly. She wobbles, steadies herself, and announces she's going to walk through her village, the fake one she built near the gardens, with its pristine dairy and staged peasant life. She says it clears her mind. No one joins her. You watch her disappear down a winding path, lanterns swinging by her side like a tiny defiant star. You sit there, glass half full, as the music fades and the guests begin to doze. The lanterns flicker. Somewhere in the distance you swear you hear the rumble of wheels on cobblestone, the sound of a city waking up angry. You rise. The garden is quiet. Too quiet. You pass the Queen's empty seat. Her glass is still there, rim smudged with lipstick, half a swallow left of champagne inside. You don't touch it. You already know how this ends. But before the blade falls, there's one more ghost to visit. Napoleon, short, sober-looking, but maybe not quite so dry as he let the world believe. The man drank less than most kings, but when he did, the ripples echoed across continents. The garden vanishes behind you. The smell of lilacs swallowed up by the acrid smoke of gunpowder and ambition. The night isn't quiet anymore. It growls. You've landed somewhere entirely different now, grander in purpose but colder in spirit. Welcome to the age of Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who crowned himself Emperor of the French and marched across Europe with all the swagger of someone who knew history was watching. His parties aren't like the ones you've seen before. No giggling duchesses or swan-shaped desserts here. These are sharp, calculating affairs. And when the wine appears, it's not about celebration. It's about power. You're in a vast salon at the Tuileries Palace. The walls are lined with military maps. The guests are a mix of generals, ministers, and foreign dignitaries. The atmosphere is less royal banquet and more covert war council with snacks. At the far end of the room, under a massive portrait of himself on horseback, sits Napoleon, slouched a little, arms crossed, face unreadable. He's not holding a glass, not yet, and everyone is pretending not to notice. It's almost a superstition. Napoleon rarely drinks in public, and when he does, it means something. Some say he's teetotal, others say he prefers water and lemon. A few whisper that he downs cognac behind closed doors. But tonight, he raises a goblet. It's wine, red, dark, modest. Bordeaux, maybe, or to do the Grand Cru of Versailles. He sips once, and just like that, the room shifts, conversations soften, eyes sharpen. The Emperor's drinking, you should too. The historical truth is this: Napoleon wasn't much of a drinker. Compared to the royal lushes before and after him, he was downright ascetic. He preferred control of his troops, of his image, of his own impulses. But when he did drink, it was strategic. A small glass before battle, a celebratory toast after victory, and sometimes, when the room needed a symbol of camaraderie, he'd sip just enough to remind everyone he was human. Almost. There's a curious, often overlooked fringe detail that complicates the sober myth. Napoleon was fond of Chambertin, a Burgundy wine, which he allegedly drank diluted with water. Not for taste, but for digestion. Some say he brought barrels of it with him on campaign, tucked between crates of ammunition and cavalry saddles. It's hard to picture, but then again, this was a man who travelled with a personal silver dinner service while invading Russia. Nobody said he was practical, and while he was reserved with wine, his marshals were not. Men like Murat, Ney and Lanner partied hard, sometimes dangerously so. There's a report of a drinking night in Vienna after a French victory, where Marshal Massena fell off a banquet table mid-toast and broke 2 ribs. Napoleon, upon hearing this, reportedly said only, "Then he deserved it." He had little patience for indulgence. Victory was intoxicating enough. Tonight, though, he's in a rare mood. A minor battle has been won, a new treaty signed. He offers a formal toast to the Republic, which is awkward, considering he's now an emperor. He smirks as he drinks, like he enjoys the irony. You lift your own glass, your hand shakes just a little, and you match him sip for sip. The wine isn't rich, it's dry, serious, almost austere. You taste iron and stone, there's nothing sweet about it, just like the man himself. Then the Emperor leans forward, hands still around the glass, and begins speaking. Not loudly, not as a ruler, but as a storyteller. He recounts a campaign in Egypt, hot, brutal, endless sand, and a night when his troops, dehydrated and half-mad, stumbled across a crate of preserved figs and a bottle of wine. "We shared it," he says, "like it was the last liquid on earth. Even then, we left some for the horses." The room chuckles nervously. No one's quite sure if it's a joke. There's a scholarly debate about Napoleon's drinking. Some biographers insist he remained largely abstinent out of discipline. Others suggest his habits changed with age. He reportedly drank more during his exile on Elba, perhaps out of boredom or bitterness. Letters from attendants mention evening drinks, usually watered wine, and a rare indulgence in brandy when the weather turned grim. It wasn't much, but it was telling. Even an emperor needs a crutch when the empire starts slipping through his fingers. Back in the Tuileries, the night continues. The music is subdued, all strings and soft brass. No one dances. This isn't that kind of party. Instead, the officers gather in tight circles, sipping and murmuring. Plans, borders, war. You move between them, glass in hand, pretending to belong. The wine helps. Or at least it dulls the edges of the cold stares. At one point, Napoleon stands, gestures for quiet. He raises his goblet and says, "To France, she may not always deserve victory, but she always demands it." A low chorus of Vive l'Empereur follows. You raise your glass again. It's empty. A servant refills it with something richer this time. Cognac. You sip carefully. It burns, warm and complex. You feel it settle in your chest, like courage or madness, maybe both. Napoleon catches your eye across the room. He doesn't smile, but he nods. Once. It's not approval, it's acknowledgement. You've drunk with an emperor now, and you didn't blink. Later, as the room thins and the maps are rolled away, you step out into the Paris night. The city is quiet, but the future is loud. You can feel it coming. The return, the exile, Waterloo. This was never about the wine. It was about what it meant to not drink. About a man who ruled the world by keeping his grip on the glass light. And his grip on power tight. Next, you're headed to England again, but not to the Tudors. We're going into the lace and iron heart of Queen Victoria's court, where restraint is everything until the port starts flowing and the gloves come off. Paris fades, the cobblestones giving way to the polished parquet floors of another empire. The air tightens. Gone is the raw heat of revolution, the brooding storm of Napoleon's ambition. You're in England now, but not the sweaty roar of Henry's feasts or Elizabeth's velvet wit. This is a colder age, stiffer, sharper. Welcome to the court of Queen Victoria, where restraint is religion, emotion is the enemy, and a proper lady holds her sherry like a dagger wrapped in lace. But make no mistake, the empire still drinks, it just lies about it better. You're standing in a drawing room at Buckingham Palace, surrounded by wallpaper so ornate you swear it's judging you. The furniture is too delicate to sit on, and every vase looks like a trap. Gilded mirrors reflect candlelight, polished boots, and the kind of facial expressions that suggest everyone here is either terribly bored or halfway to a breakdown. There's a table, of course, long and polished, lined with glasses. Not tankards, not goblets, but refined crystal, shaped to whisper rather than clink. The wine is port, deep, heavy, solemn. Like everything else, Queen Victoria has not arrived yet, and that's normal. One does not arrive when one is the entire institution. But her presence is everywhere, in the glances of her ladies-in-waiting, in the stiff backs of the men, in the way no one dares touch the drinks until the first bell is rung. You're handed a glass, but told to wait for the proper cue. You nod. Of course, it's not a party. It's a ritual disguised as etiquette, wrapped in tension. Now here's your historical pin. Queen Victoria wasn't exactly the dry, dour caricature we often imagine. In fact, she drank regularly, moderately but consistently. Her drink of choice? Claret. A red Bordeaux blend that became so associated with her that it surged in popularity across Britain. She also favoured port, occasionally champagne, and had a noted fondness for a concoction called Vin Mariani, a French tonic wine laced with coca leaves. Yes, that kind of coca. Victorian pick-me-ups were ambitious. Still, drinking under Victoria's reign was not about excess, it was about appearances. Royal feasts were conducted with military precision. Toasts were performed, not enjoyed. One sip too many and your reputation could sink faster than an ironclad. But the real drinking, that happened behind the scenes. The courtiers, the staff, even the clergy. Once the Queen retired, the gloves and corsets came off. Entire secondary banquets sprang up after the official functions, full of port, sherry and scandal. A particularly delicious fringe detail. Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, had a secret recipe for mulled wine, infused with orange peel, cinnamon, cloves and enough brandy to start a fire. It was served at winter gatherings and dubbed the Prince's Cure, for everything from melancholy to marital strain. Some said Victoria hated the scent. Others claimed she loved it but wouldn't admit it in public. Typical Victorian marriage, coded love, loud silence. There's still scholarly back and forth about just how buttoned up Victoria really was. Diaries and private letters show a woman far more passionate and playful than her public image allowed. She joked, she danced. She even, on occasion, drank to genuine enjoyment, but always behind the veil. To be visibly drunk in the court of Victoria would be to fall from grace, and falling from grace in this court meant exile in the most humiliating sense, social death where your name was never spoken again. Tonight's event is in honour of a visiting German noble. The Queen finally arrives, black-clad, severe, face set in that famously unimpressed gaze. She greets the room with a nod and proceeds to her chair. No throne, just a chair. A velvet armchair, absurdly regal without trying. The butler appears. The bell rings. The first glasses are raised. You sip, ported sweet thick, the taste of old libraries and undead things. You glance around. No one's talking loudly. Conversations are whispered, curated. A lord nearby mumbles something about trade routes and naval strength, while his wife stares blankly into her glass like it might whisper an escape plan. Victoria sips, tiny calculated sips. Her hand doesn't tremble. Her eyes don't soften. She drinks not for pleasure, but for continuity. It's not wine, it's duty, fermented. And then something strange happens. A younger courtier, barely more than a boy, laughs too loudly at a joke. He lifts his glass again and chokes slightly on the sip. Silence. The entire room pauses. Victoria turns. Slowly. One eyebrow lifts. The boy pales. She says nothing. But she doesn't have to. He lowers his glass. It's empty anyway. That's the genius of her court. No decapitations, no dramatic banishments. Just cold looks and empty invitations. You vanish socially long before anyone notices you're gone. You refill your glass, quietly. No servers here hover or chatter. They drift, as if on rails, refilling, replacing, retreating. The port tastes darker now, or maybe that's just the mood. Hours pass. You watch the ritual unfold. Someone proposes a toast to the Queen's continued reign. Everyone echoes it in perfect unison. You join in. Of course, to refuse would be social suicide, possibly literal depending on your title. Later, after the Queen retires, the room relaxes an inch. Coats are unbuttoned. Laughter returns. The port flows faster. Someone opens a bottle of Victoria's favourite champagne. Yes, the same Queen who wore widow's black for 40 years still liked a good Krug. You sip that too. Lighter. Brighter. A reminder that even in this tightly corseted court, indulgence had its corner. But only in corners. By the time you step out into the foggy London night, your head buzzing from port and politics, you realise something. This wasn't a feast, it was a performance. A drink served in a silver cup held with a gloved hand, never spilled, never shown. This was how empires drank when they were terrified of appearing human. But next you'll trade lace for lacquer and monarchy for modernity. You're going east again, back to Japan. But this time it's not a feudal dream. It's Emperor Meiji's world now. Sake still flows, but under electric lights in a country trying to outdrink the future. The fog of Victorian restraint lifts, and the air pour more clears, sharper now, carrying something crisp and unfamiliar. Modernity. You've stepped into Japan again, but it's not the quiet world of masked shoguns and whispered toasts. This is the Meiji era. And the difference is immediate. Gas lamps flicker alongside ancient lanterns. Silk gives way to Western suits, and somewhere, not far off, a phonograph stutters through a Chopin nocturne. It's a strange hybrid world, half tradition, half progress, and all caught in the uneasy in-between. And in the middle of it sits Emperor Meiji, sipping sake in silence, watching his country rewrite itself faster than he can refill his cup. The room you're in now isn't a castle, and it isn't a temple. It's something in between, an imperial salon with wood floors polished like mirrors, sliding doors carved with cherry blossoms, and chairs. Western chairs. They look wrong here, off balance. You take your seat slowly, feeling the eyes of the court on you, not hostile, just curious. You're not expected to speak. You're expected to listen, to absorb, and to drink with a kind of awareness that makes every sip feel sacred. The Emperor enters with no fanfare, no trumpets, just a nod, quiet footsteps, and an aura of exhaustion that you can practically taste. He's dressed in a Western-style uniform, military, trim, covered in medals, but he moves with the stillness of a monk. When he takes his seat, a servant steps forward with a sack bottle, ceramic, hand-painted, slightly chipped at the rim. There's something comforting in its imperfection. He pours his own drink. That's the first shock. It breaks tradition. In the old ways, one never poured for oneself. It was a gesture of humility, of communal respect. But Meiji isn't playing by the old rules. He's the architect of a country that has decided, with unsettling speed, to embrace the future. Out go the samurai. In come the factories. Out goes isolation. In comes the world. And all of it, every rail line, every reformed law, every shipment of imported whiskey, happens under the gaze of a man who seems like he'd rather be anywhere else. Here's your historical anchor. Emperor Meiji, who reigned from 1867 to 1912, presided over Japan's dramatic transformation from a closed feudal society into a modern imperial power. And with this transformation came a fascinating evolution in royal drinking culture. Sake remained the cornerstone, of course, but Western influence crept in quickly. French wines, Scotch whiskey, even champagne appeared at state dinners. The emperor himself reportedly preferred traditional sake, but would drink Western liquors on diplomatic occasions, carefully, strategically. You sip the sake placed before you, warm, earthy, a little bitter, like roasted rice and ghost stories. It's not ceremonial now, it's survival. You can feel it in the emperor's posture, in the way his fingers twitch on the lacquered rim of his cup. He drinks slowly, methodically, like a man afraid to get too comfortable. Because comfort breeds complacency, and complacency, in this new world, gets countries colonized. Here's a lesser-known detail. Emperor Meiji was reportedly a heavy drinker in private, especially in his later years. Rumours from court whisper of solitary nights, long after the advisors had left, where he'd drink alone and stare out at the growing skyline of Tokyo, muttering haiku under his breath. Some even say he kept a journal of poems he'd never publish, written only when he drank. Sake and silence, regret and rice wine. There's still debate among historians about how much of this is true. Meiji was a famously opaque figure. Carefully managed by his court, his public image had scrubbed and edited like an imperial press release. Some scholars argue that the drinking rumours were overblown, meant to humanize a man who had become more symbol than sovereign. Others believe the opposite, that Meiji, trapped between worlds, used sake not as celebration but as sedative. Back in the salon, a toast is proposed, not by the emperor but by a visiting foreign advisor, British judging by the moustache. He stands, raises a crystal glass of European red wine, and makes a clumsy speech about progress and partnership. The emperor nods, polite, hollow. He lifts his cup of sake, says nothing, and drinks. The room follows. You do too. The red wine tastes jarringly out of place. After the toast, conversation resumes, quiet, formal. You hear snippets of trade agreements, discussions about naval ships, about telegraph lines. But there's no laughter, no music, just the clink of porcelain and the low hum of national reinvention. At some point, the emperor rises, not to leave, to speak. Everyone stills. He talks about balance, about the sea and the sky, about how modernity is not a river, but a wave. If we don't ride it, he says, voice soft, we drown. He lifts his sack again, drinks deeply. A long silence follows. No one knows what to say. Eventually they go back to their glasses. Later, after the emperor withdraws, the mood loosens slightly. A few of the younger officials uncork imported bottles of scotch, speaking in hushed tones about London, Berlin, Paris. They raise their glasses to the new Japan. Someone plays a Western tune on a phonograph awkwardly, off-key. You stay with the sake, you wander the outer gardens after midnight. The sky cloudy, the stars mostly hidden. You pass a servant carrying an empty bottle with reverent care. Another stands still beneath a maple tree, humming something old, something pre-Meiji. The palace behind you glows faintly, a mix of gaslight and electric bulbs, a symbol of the old and new locked in an uncomfortable truce. You think of the emperor again, alone in a room, eyes on a map, fingers curled around a ceramic cup. You wonder what he thinks about when the meetings end, what it's like to guide 1,000-year-old culture through the bottleneck of time, knowing some of it won't survive the squeeze. And you wonder what happens when the cup runs dry. But there's no time to dwell. The modern age is here and it's heading west again, to a country on the brink of collapse. Next, you're drinking with a Kaiser who toasts with Riesling while the world cracks beneath his boots. It's optimism in a wine glass, poured too full, too fast. You barely have time to let the sake settle before the world shifts again, lurching west and slightly downward into a heavy horn-polished chair lined with red velvet. You're in Berlin now, in the early 20th century, staring at a table so shiny it reflects your own face back at you, pale, blinking, and already regretting the next glass. Welcome to the court of Kaiser Wilhelm II, a man with a famously withered arm, an oversized ego, and a fondness for Riesling that aged poorly, much like his empire. The air smells of cigars, varnish, perfume, and wealth that's trying too hard. You're seated in a private dining hall in the Neues Palais at Potsdam, the kind of room that screams too much in 17 different languages. Oil paintings of Prussian generals glare down at you like disapproving ancestors, and the chandelier overhead is so gaudy it might actually be sentient. This isn't Versailles. It's Versailles with a superiority complex and worse interior design. And there, at the head of the table, is Wilhelm II, the last German emperor. Wearing a dress uniform stiff enough to stand on its own, his signature upturned moustache so waxed it defies gravity. He's already holding a glass of pale golden Riesling, swirling it like he's about to make it confess something. His smile is sharp, and behind his eyes, there's that look, the look of a man who wants to be both admired and feared, but keeps tripping over his own delusions. He stands, raises the glass, toasts to the greatness of the German spirit, and everyone claps like it's a royal command, which it is. You lift your own glass. The wine is sweet and floral, a Mosel vintage with a high sugar content and an even higher opinion of itself. It's pleasant, disarming, and that's the danger. The thing about Wilhelm is that his drinking wasn't reckless. It was strategic. He didn't guzzle, he didn't stagger. He sipped, always just enough to feel like the cleverest man in the room. His poison of choice was Riesling, often from his own estates, and he wasn't stingy with it. Bottles were opened at meetings, banquets, and even military briefings. You could say a lot about Wilhelm, but not that he lacked commitment to keeping morale artificially inflated, one toast at a time. Your historical anchor. Wilhelm II was a man born at the intersection of collapsing monarchies and rising industrial chaos. He tried to walk both roads, talking like a king and acting like a CEO. He used drink not to forget, but to perform, hosting endless banquets full of pomp and stiff grandeur to prove Germany belonged at the grown-up table of empires. There are records of entire diplomatic evenings spent wine-deep in predictions about global dominance, toasted with phrases like, "Europe cannot afford to ignore Germany." Spoiler, then they didn't. Fringe fact incoming, Wilhelm reportedly hosted wine diplomacy dinners where he would serve only German wines, refusing champagne outright to reinforce national pride. He'd scold guests who didn't appreciate the bouquet. There's even an anecdote about him stopping mid-conversation to correct someone's wine vocabulary. He may have started World War I, but heaven forbid you misuse the word trocken. But behind the ceremony was a man unravelling. Scholars argue whether Wilhelm's excessive optimism, often buoyed by these grand wine-laced evenings, clouded his ability to read the political room. His speeches became erratic, his alliances grew unstable, and when the war began to close in, his toasts grew more desperate, more performative, like raising your glass while the house burns down behind you and insisting everything is under control. Tonight, he's in fine form, laughing too loud at a general's joke, slapping a minister on the back, dictating the details of an imperial yacht upgrade while simultaneously criticising British naval design. You sip your wine slowly, trying to stay invisible. The more Wilhelm talks, the more you realise. He drinks like a man with something to prove. He lifts the glass not to share joy, but to assert control. Every toast is a proclamation, every refill a declaration of relevance. Then comes the awkward part. A guest, young, idealistic, and tragically sober, makes a comment about growing unrest in the Balkans. The room freezes. Wilhelm pauses, glass halfway to his lips. "We are Germans," he says slowly, "and Germans do not worry. We act." The toast that follows is louder, more forceful, more blinding in its optimism, but it lands like a brick. There's a scholarly debate around Wilhelm's state of mind in these years. Was he delusional, or just a man trapped in an impossible moment clinging to rituals because they were the only thing that still worked? Some historians suggest his drinking was a symptom, part of a broader refusal to face reality. Others see it as normal courtly behaviour, exaggerated by hindsight and the collapse that followed. Either way, you can't unsee the cracks. By the third glass, your head's buzzing, not from the alcohol, but from the sheer weight of the delusion swirling in the room. There's a pianist playing in the corner now, Chopin again. The volume's low enough not to interfere with the speeches, but loud enough to drown out any quiet thoughts of doom. Wilhelm raises one final toast. To the future of Europe. You don't clap this time, you drink. The wine tastes suddenly sour. As the night winds down, the Kaiser disappears behind a carved oak door, leaving the rest of the court to flatter each other into oblivion. You step outside. Berlin is quiet, cold. A train whistles in the distance. The Empire is still standing for now, but you can feel it tipping. This wasn't just a drinking night. It was a denial parade, a Riesling-soaked fantasy marching straight toward catastrophe. Too proud to change course, too drunk to notice the edge. Next, you'll sip champagne with the doomed Romanovs at their final royal gathering, where glitter, crystal, and laughter echo through the palace like ghosts in a house already claimed by history. The echo of Wilhelm's final toast dissolves into silence, and when you blink again, everything has changed. You're in Russia, but not the grim, frostbitten court of Ivan, nor the chaotic, vodka-fueled circus of Peter the Great. This is St. Petersburg, 1916. The snow is falling soft outside like it hasn't yet realised what's coming. Inside the Alexander Palace, it's warm, golden, and far too calm, because this is the last royal party of the Romanovs, one final glittering breath before the lights go out. You're in the grand hall, and it's beautiful. Gilded mirrors reflect candlelight like ripples on water. Tchaikovsky swirls through the air in faint strains from a quartet in the corner. The scent of beeswax, pine, and delicate French perfume floats around you. Everyone is dressed to perfection. Officers in crisp white uniforms, ladies in diamonds and silk. Jewels catching the light like promises. On the surface, it's the kind of evening that would have fit comfortably into any golden age, except it's not the golden age anymore. It's the eve of collapse, and everyone here knows it. Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, stands near the head of the long table, a flute of champagne in hand, and smiling in that soft, apologetic way that makes you think he knows how doomed he is, but can't quite say it out loud. He looks tired, not drunk, not angry, just exhausted. He raises his glass with quiet grace. To the season, he says, and to peace. It's a lie, of course, but the room drinks anyway. You sip. The champagne is exquisite, icy, crisp, with just enough sweetness to remind you that this is a family who used to order it by the case from France and didn't stop even during the war. There's caviar too, and oysters, goose, sweet stacked in pyramids of sugar and pastry. The wine flows and the talk pretends. Everyone's rehearsing the old lines. The war is going well, the people are content, the empire is eternal. You're the only one in the room who hears the edge in their voices. Here's your historical anchor. The Romanovs, even in their final years, maintained their royal rituals with astonishing devotion. Despite the war, despite famine, despite revolution simmering just outside the palace gates, their dining tables remained full. Champagne, imported delicacies, private concerts all continued. Not out of arrogance, but out of habit, and perhaps fear. If they stopped the performance, it would mean admitting the stage was burning. The Romanovs weren't binge drinkers, not publicly, their court was more refined than raucous. Nicholas himself was known to prefer moderate amounts of wine or beer, usually with dinner. His wife Alexandra leaned more toward medicinal tonics, often laced with alcohol, particularly as her health and nerves began to crumble. But the court, the nobles, the officers on leave from the front, they drank with the urgency of men who knew time was running out. Particularly tragic fringe fact. During the last imperial Christmas before the revolution, the Romanovs held a feast so lavish it made the newspapers, featuring over 50 imported dishes and more than 100 bottles of French wine. Just days later, strikes and bread riots erupted in Petrograd. Some sources say the family read about them over to breakfast, sipping their coffee from gold-rimmed porcelain while trying to decide what to wear that evening. Timing, as always, is everything. Tonight the mood keeps twisting like a screw. You drift from room to room, glass in hand, as laughter and conversation bubble like a dream you can't wake from. Rasputin is dead, murdered just days ago. No one says it out loud, but you can feel the hole he left, an odd mix of relief and dread. There's talk of his last night, whispered over wine, poisoned, shot, drowned. Some joke that he drank more poison than a priest should have been able to stomach. You wonder if they realise how little that matters now. There's debate among historians about the Romanovs' awareness. Were they truly blind to the revolution building around them, or simply powerless to stop it? Did these parties continue out of denial, or because abandoning them would have signalled surrender? Some argue they were insulated beyond comprehension, living in a fantasy until the end. Others believe they knew exactly what was happening, and just had no good options left. You find yourself in a smaller room, quieter, warmer. The family's personal dining space, a few close friends. Alexandra sits with her daughters, pale and quiet, her fingers wrapped around a porcelain cup of tea that might or might not contain something stronger. You see the anxiety in her every movement. She leans in close to her youngest, Anastasia, whispers something that makes the girl smile. It's real, small, fleeting. Nicholas enters a moment later, still carrying his glass. He doesn't say much, he doesn't have to. He's not a ruler tonight. He's a father, a husband, a man trying to enjoy what little peace he has left before the storm breaks for good. You raise your glass in a soft, unscripted toast. He sees it, nods. The evening drifts further into the early hours. The laughter gets looser. Someone plays a Russian folk song on the piano and a few brave souls attempt to sing. The lyrics stumble. No one minds. The servants bring out more champagne. One bottle won't open, and everyone laughs a little too hard when the cork finally pops and bounces off a chandelier. Outside, the snow is piling up like history itself. Quiet, relentless. A thick, white hush over a country about to bleed. You leave the palace through the back, into a garden still lit by flickering lamps. You pause, glass in hand, and look up. The stars are out. Perfect. Indifferent. This was the last royal party for the Romanovs. A few months from now, they'll be prisoners. A few more, and they'll be gone. You think about their last toasts, their last sips of wine, their last small attempts to feel normal in a world that had already decided they were done. You drain your glass, because next you'll sit with Churchill, half cigar, half whiskey, all grit, and staring down a war from the bottom of a bottle, and convincing a nation not to blink. The snow of St. Petersburg melts underfoot, and suddenly it spoke, thick, grey, curling into your lungs with the burn of something sharper than winter. You're no longer at a court, no longer dancing under chandeliers or sipping champagne beside doomed monarchs. Now you're in a war room, deep in the bowels of Britain's most famous address, 10 Downing Street. The floor shakes every so often from distant bombing. Somewhere overhead, Big Ben keeps ticking, stubborn as ever, and across from you in a leather chair that looks like it's aged with him, sits Winston Churchill, glass in hand, cigar already halfway to ashes, and the fate of Western civilization balanced precariously between his eyebrows. This isn't a banquet. There's no music, no caviar. The only background noise is the occasional page turning, the scribble of pencils, the hum of the electric heater fighting a losing battle. But the drink is very real, and it's moving quickly. Churchill's already 3 fingers into a glass of scotch, and it's barely past noon. You're sipping something weaker, watered-down gin maybe, but you're not sure it's helping. He sees you glance at your drink and chuckles, a low, gravelly sound. "Never trust a man who only drinks water," he mutters. "Fish fuck in it." Welcome to the most civilized war zone in history. Here's your anchor. Churchill drank a lot. That's not up for debate. What is up for debate is how much of it was myth and how much was necessary. He once reportedly said, "I have taken more out of alcohol than alcohol has taken out of me, and honestly, after spending even 5 minutes in this war room, you start to get it. The pressure is suffocating. The decisions are apocalyptic. The only thing flowing faster than intelligence briefings is the scotch. And it wasn't just one drink, now and then." Churchill had a schedule. Mornings often began with a weak whiskey and soda in bed, followed by champagne with lunch, cognac or port with dinner, and plenty of scotch in between. He wasn't drinking to escape, he was drinking to function. He claimed it sharpened him, calmed the nerves, kept the ghosts quiet. But it wasn't reckless. Churchill was rarely drunk. Buzzed, certainly. Steady, always. This wasn't the lurching, chaotic drinking of mad kings or heartbroken emperors. This was discipline, ritual, fuel, and he never drank alone. You're watching him now as he paces the room, glass in hand, dictating up a letter to the Roosevelt while simultaneously commenting on weather reports and reminding his staff to keep morale high, even when it's a lie. He stops by a sideboard and pours himself another measure, topping it off with just a whisper of soda. "Hydration," he says, deadpan. Everyone laughs, everyone drinks, you do too. Here's a lesser-known fringe detail. Churchill's favourite champagne was Pol Roger, and he consumed so much of it that after his death, the brand placed a black border around its label in mourning. He was also known to drink a version of highballs, but with whiskey so light in the morning that one aide said, it was more ritual than effect, and yet by the end of the day those rituals added up. There's also debate still to this day about whether Churchill's drinking ever got in the way of his leadership. Some critics say he was a functional alcoholic. Others argue he was just functional. He delivered speeches, held war councils, negotiated global alliances, all with a drink in hand and a cigar clenched in his teeth. If he was ever out of control, history didn't catch it on camera. This particular evening, though, is quieter. The air raid sirens have stopped. The staff is huddled over documents. Churchill slumps into his chair, scotch in hand, tie slightly loosened. The tension in his face eases just a bit. He gestures to you, raises his glass, and says simply, "To courage! The cheap kind runs out early." You clink glasses. The drink bites your throat, but you welcome it. He starts talking, not about war or politics, but about painting, landscapes, sunlight on brick. He tells a story about buying his first brush and how he realised, in the middle of a field in France, that colour could fight despair better than speeches. Then he goes quiet, just for a moment. Later, one of his aides brings in a tray with cheese and biscuits, a fresh bottle, and a thick folder marked "Confidential." Churchill ignores the folder, pours another, and flips through an old newspaper instead. "Dull men write history," he says to no one in particular. "Drunk men live it." You look around the room, maps with pins, cables stretching across the floor, ashtrays overflowing. The place is a mess, but it's the kind of mess that wins wars. Another round is poured. Someone suggests a toast to victory. Churchill lifts his glass, but doesn't smile. "Victory," he says, "if we earn it." He drinks. You do too, and for just a second you believe him. Later, when the room empties and Churchill finally heads upstairs, muttering something about the perfect bath temperature and missing cats, you find yourself standing alone in the war room. It smells like smoke, sweat, and desperation preserved in alcohol. The scotch bottle is nearly empty. The silence is thick. This wasn't royal decadence, it wasn't ceremony or indulgence. This was practical drinking, strategic intoxication, a buffer between madness and duty. Churchill didn't drink because he wanted to forget. He drank so he could remember, and still function anyway. You step outside into the London night. Bomb craters, blackout curtains, a wind that smells like coal and survival. Somewhere in the distance a pub is still open. You hear singing, rough, off-key, defiant, and next we're trading stiff upper lips for jewel-toned chaos. It's Cairo, 1940s. King Farouk is on the throne. He's drinking milkshakes, gambling palaces away, and hosting feasts so wild they make Versailles look like a soup kitchen. The damp streets of London evaporate beneath your shoes, and the acrid smoke of war is replaced with something far more decadent. Spice and perfume and the unmistakable scent of money being set on fire for fun. You've landed in Cairo, 1940s, and everything is glowing. Neon signs buzz in Arabic and French. The cars are polished like mirrors. Somewhere down the block, a belly dancer spins to the beat of a brass band while champagne bottles chill in silver buckets like they belong there. This is King Farouk's Cairo, where the clocks are ignored, the stakes are high, and royal drinking has gone fully off the rails. You're inside the Abdeen Palace now, a monstrous maze of Italian marble, Louis XV furniture, and gold-trimmed everything. Nothing matches. Everything shines. The ceiling's frescoed. The floor's carpeted in silk, and the party? It's already at full tilt. Uniformed servants glide past you with trays stacked in layers. Cocktails, cigarettes, Turkish delights, whole bowls of caviar. You haven't even been offered a seat yet, and you're already overwhelmed. Then you see him, King Farouk Way of Egypt. 20-something, immensely wealthy, immensely indulgent, dressed in military regalia that looks more like a costume than a uniform, fez perched slightly crooked, cigarette in one hand and in the other, a milkshake, chocolate, topped with whipped cream and a cherry. And yes, there's liqueur in it. probably brandy, possibly vodka. Either way, it's not his first tonight. Or his fourth. Welcome to one of the strangest royal drinking cultures in modern history. Here's your historical anchor. Farouk, who ruled Egypt from 1936 to 1952, was famous or infamous for his outrageous lifestyle. He came to power young during an unstable moment and responded not with caution, but with all-night gambling binges, wild feasts and drinking sprees that turned Cairo into a surrealist postcard. He reportedly weighed over 300 pounds by his late 20s, consumed 5-course breakfasts, and kept personal chefs on call 24/7 to whip up light snacks that would feed small villages. And yes, milkshakes spiked with liquor were one of his signature drinks. You take the glass handed to you, some bizarre concoction that tastes like mango, cardamom, and maybe rum, and follow Farouk deeper into the palace. He's moving through the crowd like a birthday boy at his own surprise party. Women laugh too loudly. Men slap backs like they're sealing arms deals. There's music pouring in from 3 different rooms, none of it in the same key, and somewhere, inexplicably, there's a live lion chained to a gilded railing. You try not to make eye contact. Farouk finally slouches into a chair designed for someone twice as self-satisfied, and gestures for you to join. He offers you another drink, this one served in a gold-rimmed glass shaped like a falcon. Sweet, cold, absolutely unnecessary. He drinks his in a single gulp and lights another cigarette, his third in 5 minutes. "My country," he says with a grin, "is your buffet." You laugh. You shouldn't have. There's a fringe fact worth pausing for. Farouk reportedly owned a secret collection of bar menus from the best hotels in Europe. He would send aides to scout cocktail lists from Paris to Rome and replicate the drinks back in Cairo. He even had imported bartenders on staff, dressed in white tuxedos, trained to make a martini that met kingly specifications. One story goes that he once sent a servant back to London mid-party because he was craving a specific gin not available in Egypt. The gin arrived by a plane 12 hours later. He'd forgotten he asked for it. You watch now as he hosts a toast, not to anything specific, just to the night. The glasses clink. A chandelier trembles overhead. The floor feels slightly tilted, and you're not sure if it's the booze or the sense that this whole country is somehow being mortgaged to pay for this party. And here's where the debate begins. Historians still argue about whether Farouk was a tragic figure or a simple embarrassment. Some insist he was a spoiled man-child who drank his reign into irrelevance. Others claim he used decadence as distraction, a way to maintain control by drowning opposition in extravagance. What is clear is that the drinking, the gambling, the parties, they all accelerated as his hold on power slipped. The more real Egypt burned, the more unreal his world became. Back at the palace, the party shifts again. The music swells, the lights dim, and Farouk is now surrounded by magicians. Real ones. One pulls a dove out of a champagne bottle. Another sets his fez on fire and calls it modern theatre. The king claps, then downs another milkshake. This one smells faintly of whiskey and rosewater. He grins and shouts for his personal belly dancer, rumoured to be a spy, depending on who you ask. She appears. The crowd erupts. You feel your stomach turn. There's too much of everything. Too much sugar, too much perfume, too much alcohol. The palace spins a little. Or maybe it's your brain trying to process how a man with this much indulgence and this little self-control ended up holding the reins of a country on the edge of revolution. And then comes the quiet moment. Late in the night, Farouk leads a few of his closest guests into a smaller salon. Dark, velvet-lined, more intimate. The noise fades behind you. Here, the drinks are different. Neater, aged scotch. Cognac in crystal tumblers. Farouk leans back, suddenly more introspective. "They'll hate me soon," he says, almost cheerfully, "but I'll still have my name on every coin." You don't know what to say, so you drink. The morning sun is rising, slipping past the heavy curtains. Outside, Cairo is waking up. Drivers honking, vendors shouting, the gears of reality grinding forward. Inside, the party's still dragging its feet. Someone's passed out in a corner. A champagne flute teeters on the edge of a side table. The lion is snoring. Farouk yawns. "I think I'll buy another yacht," he says. He won't, not this time. 2 years from now, he'll be deposed. Shoved into exile. The same streets that cheered him will call him a traitor. His palaces will be looted, and his once glamorous parties will become cautionary tales whispered through the hallways of history. But tonight, he's still king. The milkshake is still cold, the music still plays, and next you'll find yourself under desert stars again, but this time in Saudi Arabia, where the king drinks nothing at all and the party is one long, eternal pause. The neon carnival of Cairo fades behind you, melting into dust and silence. The noise drains away, no more flutes of champagne, no milkshakes, no lions dozing in velvet-lined salons. It's just sand now, miles and miles of it stretching out under a sky so wide it makes your thoughts feel small. You're in Saudi Arabia, sometime in the mid-20th century, and for the first time in this long, unbroken chain of royal drinking nights, there's no clinking of glasses, no wine, no spirits, no cocktails at all. You've stepped into a place where the cup is empty by design, and the silence around it is deafening. You're seated inside a tent that's larger than most homes, its walls lined with rich carpets and brocade cushions. Outside, the wind scratches across the dunes, but in here, the air is still. The scent is different. No alcohol in the mix, just cardamom, sweet tobacco from a pipe someone is tending, and the slow roast of meat cooking over coals. You're handed a small porcelain cup filled with steaming golden coffee. Kahwa, light, spiced with saffron and clove and poured from a beautiful curved dalla with ceremonial grace. You accept it without question, because this is the court of King Abdulaziz ibn Saud, founder of modern Saudi Arabia, and alcohol isn't just forbidden here, it's erased. Scrubbed from the room, the conversation, the culture, but here's the twist, that doesn't mean the royal court lacks its own form of intoxication. It just comes from power, from hospitality, from the tension coiled inside every perfectly measured gesture. Your historical anchor, Abdulaziz ruled from 1932 to 1953 and was the architect of a kingdom built on faith, tradition and, eventually, oil. Under his reign, the consumption of alcohol was formally banned under Islamic law, and yet his court was one of the most sought-after gatherings in the region. Foreign dignitaries, oil executives, generals, they all came here, not for wine but for influence, for a sip of something far more potent than whiskey, access. You watch now as the king enters, towering, broad-shouldered, his long white robes sweep the floor, and his keffiyeh rests perfectly, its gold band gleaming under the flickering lamplight. His eyes are sharp, even at his age, and his presence bends the room. No crown, no throne, just power, wrapped in linen. He greets you with a nod, takes a seat on a large cushion at the far end of the room, and gestures for more coffee to be poured. A servant obeys instantly. He drinks, then looks up. "You've travelled far," he says. His voice is low, gravelly. "But have you come to listen or to speak?" You decide to listen. Around you, the conversation flows, deliberate, dignified, no slurred words, no boasting, just sharp observations and long pauses, the kind of silences that demand interpretation. And instead of rounds of liquor, there are rounds of coffee, each smaller than the last, until your cup is finally left empty. That's your cue to stop. No need for speeches, no need for a toast. Here, restraint is the toast. But now comes the fringe detail. There are persistent rumours, whispers among foreign diplomats and oil men who attended these gatherings, that behind closed doors a different kind of cup sometimes emerged. Not from the king himself, but from his sons, his brothers, his guests. Imported whiskey, hidden flasks, bottles disguised and shared behind curtained rooms. It wasn't widespread, it wasn't celebrated, but it existed, lurking at the edges of a dry empire, carried in the hands of men who wanted the trappings of the West without its morality. Still, Abdulaziz was reportedly firm in his personal abstinence. Stories suggest that when alcohol was offered to him in diplomatic meetings, he declined it every time, regardless of the status of the guest. And yet, those same guests left feeling more intoxicated by his charisma, his authority than any drink could offer. There's a scholarly debate here, of course, about the authenticity of the king's courtly abstinence. Was it strictly about faith or also image? Some argue his refusal of alcohol was symbolic, a public performance of moral superiority. Others suggest it was genuine piety, untouched by the political calculation. What's clear is that this sober rule helped him draw a sharp line between the West's indulgence and his kingdom's purity, a line still guarded today. You shift on the cushion, watching the rhythm of the court. There are no grand feasts, just platters of rice and lamb served communally, fingers used instead of forks, and eaten with quiet gratitude. You're offered dates, a handful of almonds, more coffee. The king listens more than he speaks. When he does speak, the room leans in, as though his words are secrets wrapped in scripture. You find yourself strangely alert. Your thoughts are clear. There's no haze, no tipsiness, no numbing buzz, just presence. You hear every word, every creak of the tent poles, every hiss of wind against the canvas. It's a different kind of intoxication, one rooted in discipline, legacy, and the slow burn of authority that doesn't need to shout. Later, a young prince beside you, sharp-eyed, fluent in English, leans in and says, "You don't need wine to lose your balance. Look where you are." He gestures around the room, the carpets, the soft voices, the history dripping from every syllable. "This is how we drink," he says, lifting his empty cup. "We pour nothing and let the world fill in the rest." You look down at your cup, still warm, still empty. You smile. The gathering breaks after midnight. No one stumbles, no one sways. The king rises, says a few final words about patience and endurance, and disappears into his chambers without fanfare. Outside, the stars glitter like cold silver coins, and the desert wind wraps around you like a forgotten memory. You exhale. It smells like spice and power. This wasn't a night of drinks, it was a night of refusal. And somehow it hit harder than any toast you've heard so far. But don't get too comfortable in the stillness. Next, we're heading back to Europe, specifically to the palatial absurdity of Monaco, where Prince Rainier and his Hollywood bride are pouring champagne into fountains, partying in tuxedos, and trying to keep the fairy tale from curdling into scandal. The desert stars dissolve into sequin shimmer, and just like that, you're standing beneath a sky that looks painted on, a Mediterranean night so perfect it feels fake. But nothing here in Monaco is real. Not really. Not the wealth, not the smiles, not even the titles. It's all pageantry held together with expensive thread and champagne flutes. You're in the tiniest, glitziest principality in the world, and the drinks are colder than the ocean breeze. This is Prince Rainier III's Monaco, where royalty sips rosé under casino lights and the fantasy must never crack. You're standing at a gala now, not a ball. That word isn't rich enough. This is a glittering, meticulously curated event inside the Hôtel de Paris, just a stone's throw from the Casino de Monte Carlo. Marble columns, columns. Crystal chandeliers, tables covered in white linen and silver. Everything smells like fresh lilies and overpriced perfume. And champagne, that's the undercurrent. The soft pop of corks, the clink of chilled bottles, the constant bubble of celebration that never quite pauses. Then they enter. Prince Rainier and Grace Kelly. He's short, polished, carrying himself like a man very aware he married up. She's floating, practically glowing, hair perfect, smile tighter than it used to be. Together they look like something from a perfume ad. And yet, there's a tension. Maybe it's just the pressure of being Monaco's first celebrity monarchy. Maybe it's the weight of fairy tales. He lifts a glass of brut champagne. Krug, if you had to guess. She does too, hers with a slice of lemon floating like an apology. They toast the room. "To peace and glamour," Rainier says. The crowd toasts back and the party kicks into gear like a well-rehearsed musical number. You're handed a flute. It's so cold it stings your fingers. You drink anyway. Here's your historical anchor. Rainier III ruled Monaco from 1049 until 2005, and during his reign, he transformed it from a sleepy tax shelter for European aristocrats into a glimmering international playground. His marriage to Grace Kelly in 1956 wasn't just a love story, it was PR. It rebranded Monaco overnight. And with that rebranding came a new wave of royal indulgence. The court of Monaco became a swirl of film stars, financiers, race car drivers and heiresses, all drinking, all watching, all pretending not to notice the cracks. Unlike the flamboyant drinkers of old, Rainier wasn't known for wild benders. But the parties he hosted, they were designed to impress, to dazzle, to numb. The alcohol flowed like a spell. Veuve Clicquot, Dom Perignon, Bordeaux by the case. And Grace, always poised, often had a drink in hand, wine at lunch, cocktails at dinner, something discreet at charity galas. She played her part exquisitely, until she didn't. Now, your fringe detail. One recurring story tells of a party held in the palace gardens where the fountains were drained and refilled with rosé, purely for the photo op. Guests waded through it, laughing. It made the Toloids. Behind the scenes, Grace was reportedly furious at the waste, but she smiled anyway, because Monaco's royalty was a brand, and the brand was always sparkling. And yet, behind the sparkle, the debates still swirl. Was this truly a modern fairy tale or a gilded cage? Historians go back and forth. Some paint Rainier as a reformer, bringing stability to Monaco's economy and prestige to its monarchy. Others see a man increasingly obsessed with control, of image, of grace, of the illusion. And the drinking, while never scandalous on the surface, was part of that illusion. You toasted and you belonged. That was the magic trick. You're watching now as a young Grace gracefully navigates a circle of foreign dignitaries, a flute of sparkling wine always refilled, never empty. Her smile is perfect. Her laugh lands just right, but when she turns, you catch it. Just a flicker. The same look Marie Antoinette wore in that garden. The same look Farouk had just before exile. The smile that says, I have everything except freedom. Rainier, meanwhile, is locked in a loud conversation with an Italian prince about tax incentives and motor racing. He laughs too loudly, orders another round for their table. His eyes dart to Grace across the room, but he doesn't move. You wonder if this is how kingdoms drift apart, not with arguments, but with champagne toasts and public silence. The food arrives, seafood served in sculpted ice towers, tiny hors d'oeuvres you can barely taste. A sommelier offers you something aged and French, and you nod before he can finish. The wine is light, acidic, and tastes like money. You take another sip. Later the ballroom dims and the music swells. Violins, crooners, something vaguely nostalgic. Grace takes the floor for a slow dance with Rainier. The flashbulbs pop. Everyone applauds. It looks perfect. It is perfect. And yet it lands like performance art. You sip your drink and watch the fairy tale flicker. Another fringe rumour. Some guests swear that at the most exclusive parties a secret bar existed below the palace itself, hidden from cameras and reporters. There royals and their closest friends would drink in peace. No PR smile required. Whiskey, gin, Negronis strong enough to peel paint. Grace, they say, preferred vermouth with a twist. Rainier? Cognac neat. The debate continues. Was it indulgence or escape? By the time the clock approaches midnight, the party hasn't slowed. The laughter gets a little looser. A duchess trips on her gown and giggles like a child. Someone sings off key at the grand piano. The rosé flows again. Grace, now seated, lifts her glass one more time and quietly toasts no one. Just holds it in front of her lips and closes her eyes. Outside, the harbour twinkles with yachts so large they look like continents. Monaco itself is still only a sliver of land, but tonight it feels infinite. You walk along the terrace now, glass in hand, listening to the waves below. You pass guests who look just like mannequins, flawless frozen. You take one last sip. It tastes like roses and regret. This wasn't the wildness of kings or the solemnity of emperors. This was a dream designed for cameras, and everyone's drunk on the fantasy. Next, you'll tumble back to London, not to a war room this time, but to a dinner table with a queen. Elizabeth II, quiet, composed and sipping gin with the kind of calm that makes the whole empire feel less fragile than it actually is. The glittering Riviera fades like a movie reel left in the sun, and you're back in London, cooler, quieter, heavier with history. But not the London of air raids or crumbling empires. This is post-war Britain, rebuilt brick by quiet brick, and standing at its centre is a queen who never asked for the throne, but wore the crown like it was fused to her skull. You're seated at a long, polished table in Buckingham Palace. The flowers are fresh. The silver is blinding. And at the head of the table, perfectly composed and unmistakably regal, sits Queen Elizabeth II, lifting a delicate glass of gin and Dubonnet like it's just another Tuesday, which to her it is. This isn't a feast of decadence. This is duty wrapped in royal starch. The plates are perfectly placed, the courses arrive with military timing, and the conversation is a choreography of subtle nods and polite laughter. You're not here to party, you're here to witness the final form of royal drinking, controlled, measured, performed with such grace that it almost disappears. Elizabeth's voice, when she speaks, is light and clipped. She thanks the chef. She inquires about someone's recent trip to Kenya. She mentions a horse race, a film she half finished, a cousin's new Labrador. None of it matters. All of it matters. Every word is strategy, softened by small talk. Here's your historical anchor. Queen Elizabeth II, who reigned from 1952 until her death in 2022, was famously discreet about her personal habits, but certain things slipped through the veil. Chief among them, her quiet affection for a good drink, not in excess, never in public, but regularly, almost ritually. Her favourite? A mix of gin and Dubonnet, served with a slice of lemon and 2 ice cubes, typically sipped before lunch. She also reportedly enjoyed champagne, often Bollinger, and occasionally a dry martini or a glass of German white wine. Calm, classic, predictable, just like the monarch herself. The gin you're sipping now, served in a crystal tumbler so thin it almost hums, tastes clean, herbaceous, dry. It doesn't overwhelm. It doesn't insist on being noticed. It just quietly reminds you that this room belongs to someone who's outlasted every trend, every scandal, every prime minister to ever underestimate her. The Queen doesn't drink for spectacle. She drinks the way a gardener waters the roses, habitually, methodically, with quiet pleasure. There's no toasting, no sloshing, just a sip now and then, perfectly timed between courses or conversations, a quirky lesser-known detail. During state dinners, it's said that Elizabeth had her own personal wine list, separate from the official one. She would occasionally swap wines mid-course or avoid pairings she didn't care for, and if she didn't like the champagne offered, she simply drank sparkling water in the same flute. The illusion mattered more than the alcohol, and here comes the debate. Because even with a monarch so famously composed, scholars and royal watchers can't help but speculate. Was Elizabeth's drinking truly just mild and ceremonial, or was it a carefully curated part of her routine that helped her carry the weight of an institution no human should be asked to bear? Some say it was nothing. Others see it as quiet resistance, a private indulgence amid public sacrifice. You watch now as she finishes her small glass, places it gently on the table, and lifts a fork with the kind of grace that feels rehearsed over decades. Around her, guests are buzzing softly, ambassadors, dukes, judges, artists, all careful with their voices, their forks, their jokes. You hear someone ask about a corgi. Another leans in to discuss Scotland, carefully avoiding any mention of independence. It's a strange thing being here. The walls are thick with history, but the mood is oddly casual. Not warm, not cold, just efficient. The wine comes out next, a dry white. German, you think? She declines a refill, instead accepting a glass of water with a faint smile. A signal. The dinner is nearly done, and now she speaks, not a speech, just a few closing words. "It's been lovely," she says, "and I do hope everyone's had enough." Polite chuckles, the clink of cutlery setting down. A quiet toast to the Queen rises from one end of the table. She nods, modest, not flattered. Just done. She stands. So does everyone else. Chairs scrape. The orchestra picks up again in the adjoining room. Elizabeth exits slowly, precisely, with a gait that tells you this isn't her first royal dinner, or her 100th. It's probably her 10,000th. But she still drinks that same mix and still walks that same measured line between indulgence and image, because that's the job. The room begins to clear. Guests murmur thanks, take their final sips, and disappear into London's polite night. You linger a moment. One of the butlers quietly offers you another gin and Dubonnet. You accept. You sip. It's perfect. This wasn't a revel. It wasn't wild. But in its quiet confidence, it was perhaps the most powerful of all. A monarch sipping calmly while the country moved through eras, recessions, scandals, and generational upheaval. No flinching, no tabloid drama. Just a glass, half full, held with a gloved hand. Later, as you walk through the long hallway lined with portraits, Victoria, George V, Charles, you realise that this is the end of a particular lineage of drinking. The pageantry, the danger, the absurdity, the elegance, it all led here, to this queen, this moment, this quiet final toast. And so, with the clink of your own glass fading in your hand, you step out into the night. The story's complete now. You've drunk with tyrants, saints, geniuses, fools. You've tasted revolution in red wine, exile in whiskey, and collapse in champagne. You've heard toasts made with trembling hands, seen goblets spill for gods and grudges, and witnessed history swirl at the bottom of a silver cup. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let it all settle. Sweet dreams.